recording. Yep. Right, good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Mary Wheel, Chair of the committee, obviously chairing tonight's meeting. This meeting will be live streamed on YouTube, but part of our paper is in Part B in item 7 related to the Nottingdale Fleet Network, and that will have to be heard in private if we discuss it due to commercial reasons. I'd like to welcome everybody here in the committee room and everybody who will be watching on YouTube. Before we start the meeting, can everybody please check that their phones turned off or on silent, because we will start with 72 seconds of silence from those who lost their lives in the Grenfell fire. And thank you. So starting off with apologies for absence, I've had apologies for absence from Councillor Knight. Does anyone have any interest to declare under item 2?
Always into item 2, I think we have Councillor Baxter coming late.
Right, sorry, as in actually apologies for absence and apologies for lateness for Councillor Baxter. No declarations of interest under item 2. So, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 19th of June. Can I sign those? They've been circulated. Can I sign them as correct? Thank you very much. So we'll start our meeting with the Borough Commander's report. This committee carries out the statutory scrutiny of crime and disorder in the borough. And part of this process involves an annual report from the Borough Commander. I'm delighted to welcome our Detective Chief Superintendent Christina Jessup, who is our new Borough Commander. Very warm welcome to you from all of us, and I'd like to invite you to introduce your report.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody, for welcoming me to the committee today. In terms of what we'll be talking about, I'm ably assisted by Owen and Lucy, my two superintendents. Owen, I'm sure you all know very well already.
You as well. Sorry, welcome to both of you as well.
And very much, just like I say, this is week 5 for me in my post, and I've been delighted with what I've seen from the team so far. I know there's still some work to do, but I have real confidence in the work that Owen and his team have been delivering so far with this. Our Commissioner has been very clear on what he wants us to prioritise: violence and violence in all its guises, so violence against women and girls, but particularly weapon-enabled violence on London streets as well, and of course within this borough of RB. And we're getting strong when I say it. RBKC.
We've got plenty of practice, don't we worry.
And so internally we've been talking about what we need to be doing around that to make sure we're meeting the objectives that you and the local authorities have set for us, but also our bosses internally, and they will be outlined in the report. So there will be issues such as drug-enabled violence, nighttime economy, and how we make sure the hotspots, particularly areas such as our sport, which I've mentioned, our police, and how we work with our partners and key stakeholders to make sure that we are satisfying everything that we've aimed to do in the report. So I know I've only got a short time, Chair, and I really want to give some time to Lucy and Owen, who will be talking about what we're doing in the public protection space and what we're doing in NAPID, which I think are key to that. So if you don't mind, I might interject later, but I want to really give you some time.
Okay. Okay, right. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Chair. First, I don't think you've had anyone from public protection this panel before, if I'm right in thinking. So thank you for having me. We felt that it would be worthwhile for me to be here to just talk about some of the work in the public protection arena of policing. So if got a few minutes just to present a bit about what we're doing in RBKC and in the wider BCU. So I'm the lead public protection for Central West, managing multiple teams across that particular strand of policing, including community safety unit, which deals with racially motivated and other motivated hate crime, domestic abuse, rape and serious sexual offences, child abuse, and child exploitation, sex offender management, mental health, and the online indecent images of children as well. So varied portfolio, and also crucially the MASH teams who deal with the referrals from police into social care, adult and child social care. Part of my role is to represent the BCU on the local Safeguarding Children Partnership, the Safeguarding Adult Executive Board, and on the Board Strategic Board. So I represent at superintendent level, and then many of my colleagues support me in attending various subgroups that support those executive boards, leading on various operational groups as well, for example, the Risk and Review Panel, which sits under the Board Strategic Board. And what I would say about those relationships is I think they're, certainly from my point of view, pretty healthy. I think there's a good degree of challenge, but also support as well. I think there's quite a nice balance. There's some quite lively conversation very often. I was at the Board Strategic Board earlier today, actually, around how we can all do our bit as various agencies to, particularly around the board at the moment, very, very high profile topic, particularly around domestic abuse, how we can pull together and each do our bit as different agencies to have an impact around VORG. One particular area of focus, and I think for me personally, one of the most difficult areas to crack is domestic abuse, because of the very profile, the very complex nature of it, but also the fact it's largely a private space offence, and how we tackle and prevent. Sometimes it feels quite reactive for me in that area. We end up reacting to investigations, allegations, and I'd like to be more on the front foot. We're looking at how we can do that through managing some of our perpetrators. I don't know whether any of you are familiar with the VORG 100, which was a scheme brought in late last year to tackle some of our highest risk VORG nominals across London. And each BCU is given a number of nominals that reside on their area. We've been managing several of those people within the BCU. I think we've had 4 that reside in RBKC, and we've done a degree of reactive and proactive work against those nominals to look at different tactics around orders and so forth to manage them. We also, one of my DIs from the Community Safety Unit chair the MARAC in this borough, and in the last 12 months we've discussed 305 cases of that panel, which is about 25 per month average. So for a borough that doesn't have a high volume of domestic abuse, I'm happy to say, I think we're the 30th lowest in the Met out of 32 boroughs. We still have an average of 25 cases. That's 25 individuals, 25 families experience domestic abuse. So still quite a high number. We also work with the multi-agency public protection arrangements, MAPA, to manage some of our most serious sexual and violent nominals. And obviously we're working very closely, particularly with probation and prisons, to manage the changes in legislation around the early release of prisons. And the last forum to mention is the multi-agency child exploitation panel, which we're engaged in, and one of my DCI's co-chairs, and we're very engaged in that panel as well. We talked about priority areas that Boss has already mentioned, particularly the focus on violence, for me, sexual violence and domestic abuse in particular. We have got the highest outcome rate for rape at the moment on VCU in the Met. I'd love that to continue. It's taken an awful lot of work to upskill staff, certainly around resourcing, but also around capability. I'd like to really embed that high performance going forwards. Our domestic abuse detection rate and outcome rate at the moment is around 9%, and I'd like that to be a bit higher, frankly. And we're looking at how we can achieve that at the moment, just around revisiting some of our processes internally to make sure that we're maximising evidence-led prosecutions, so prosecutions where the victim is not able to engage with us, and make the most of our specialist domestic abuse court. It's Westminster that covers this borough as well. We have a well-embedded police rule board, which interfaces with the Borough Rule Board, which covers our VKC. We've had 3 boards so far, and I think it's fair to say it's a bit of a work in progress to find out how that interface works. But I know from feedback that partners have found it interesting to see the kind of really police focus around walk, rather than the strategic board. We've only got a few minutes to present some of the stuff that we're doing. So that for me is working well. And then just one last thing from me, it's around we're consulting currently on our first ever children's strategy, which my colleague Detective Superintendent Ian Keating has been working on for some months. It has gone out to the various leads across the BCUs and local authorities, and it's about resetting our police's relationship with young people, treating them as children first, before anything else, getting the safeguarding right, using those opportunities, those teachable, reachable moments to change the outcome of children's lives. We've seen that all of us too many serious injuries and too many deaths of children, not only in this borough but across London. And I think probably that's long overdue, but a really interesting piece of work, I think. And there will be an action plan that sits beneath that clearly is public protection lead and need for child protection on the BCU are really involved in, and there'll be some governance around that to deliver that strategy. I think I'm probably up to my time, am I not? Have I missed anything?
No.
Okay, I'll hold it there and then thank you. Thanks.
Good evening. Tonight has really reminded me how quickly a year goes in policing. It doesn't seem like that long ago. I was sat here last year. It's always a good reminder that every day we have to try to improve and do something a bit better in policing. I think we're doing that. I'm as enthusiastic and excited by what we're achieving on the borough now as I was last year. I'm not coming to you a broken man having spent a year on the borough. We are really achieving great things. But last year we talked about New Vet for London and what was that actually going to deliver and what was that actually going to look like. And it was all about the delivery. It was much of the feedback that was from yourselves and also the communities that you're in at the minute. So when we look at it in terms of neighbourhood policing, it's that real structural change. We have really changed the structure of our neighbourhoods teams. And the actual tangible change for that is the uplift in additional inspector on the borough. For me, as one of the leaders in policing here, it's been revolutionary, and the feedback has been fantastic around the precision and the grip that's given to the neighbourhood policing teams. Similarly, sitting below my 2 inspectors now, I've got an additional 4 sergeants. That's huge for us. No sergeant's got more than 2 wards to deal with, whereas previously they had 4. We've got 1 ward where it's 1 sergeant for 1 ward because we recognise how difficult that ward is to police. That's really responding to what people are saying to us, is that you need to listen and you need to put your resources and your leadership in the right place. We've also brought our stores and youth engagement officers closer into our neighbourhoods teams, so now they are working on the same locations, they're on the same wards as their schools, as the ward teams. So now we're seeing an increase in our capability to respond to keeping our young people safe. And they're most vulnerable when they're outside school going to and from school. So we're really focusing on that and using our ward teams alongside our schools officers to get that right. So those are the real tangible changes that you can see. But the Commissioner was really clear about community crime fighting. That was the sort of phrase that was used a lot last year and still is now. But what does that actually look like in reality? So every ward panel has got their priorities. They are set now. Every ward panel has one. It has 3, sorry. And they really do feed up into our monthly tasking meetings. So I work really closely with colleagues in the local authority to make sure that we're really tasking our asset really well. So we meet monthly with the recognition that actually across all public services, there are limited resources. So we need to make sure that we're really efficient. And I think what the public of Kensington and Chelsea want to see is that policing and local authorities and local government all stood together shoulder to shoulder. We need to be united in what we do. We need to be really efficient. So we make sure that our local policing teams know where the street enforcement team are and vice versa. So we're not covering the same ground and we're being as effective as we can. And also we're all doing the right things. Our officers should be out looking at crime and fighting crime. That's what we want them to do in their wards. What I said last year is still true today. We can't respond and investigate everything. We just can't. We don't have the capacity to do that. What we should be able to do is be responsive to local need and local concern. And I'm going to take the opportunity to celebrate some of the success that we've had. If you look at it, community concern was residential burglary, motor vehicle crime and robberies. They are on most ward panel priorities. And looking in the pack, they are all down over the last year. We're not going to rest on our laurels, but that crime is down, and that's got to be a good thing. We should recognise that, I think. But the last thing I'm going to touch on is, you know, what does the reality of policing the borough look like? So at the moment, we have multiple proactive operations going on in the borough. Now, when I started, that wasn't the case. And I always said my role, part of it, was to fight the corner for the borough. That's what we've done. We've requested assets, we've requested people to focus in on what we need them to do. But that's been led by our neighbourhood teams. So Portobello Road Market, we've had a dedicated operation led by neighbourhood teams in that area because of the huge volume of thefts that have taken place. That's down by 80% now because of their work. End of June was the first Saturday we've had for over a year. There's been no reported thefts at Portobello Road Market. That is responding to local concerns and making the area keep its status as being iconic and feeling safe. But then you look at the other extreme, we had horrific firearms discharge in Southern Road. Huge masses of, you know, real community concern and worry there. 3 people have been charged by specialist crime recently for that offence. So we found the people who did it and we charged them and they're going to court. But alongside that, the neighbourhood teams have carried out closure orders in the area and been in that area to reassure people and doing the longer term work. Well, a good example, so I got told about this last week, a good example is our teams being out and about and making people feel safe and doing the right thing. Is in Portobello Green. Our ward teams were out and recognised someone who's a known sex offender who targets vulnerable people and knew he was wanted, but they chased after him and caught him and brought him in. That's what we want our ward teams doing, making people safe and actually delivering really good results, and that is happening every week. That's happening. And the last thing I'll touch on is just to show the breadth of what they do and how they lead people into the borough. Is a lot of people will feedback to us about aggressive cycling, aggressive driving on the borough and how unsafe that is. And I think sometimes I can get lost in the priorities of crime and what we're trying to do. But we did a traffic operation in Redcliffe recently. 40 cars were stopped in just 8 hours. We stopped 40 cars. 2 arrests were out of that. The drink drive procedures on multiple people. That is really responding to what people in Redcliffe were telling us they wanted to see. I won't take up too much time because I want to take up questions time, but that's just a snapshot of what I think is going really well. There's challenges without a doubt, and there's more work to do. But neighbourhood policing is thriving, I think, and is doing well.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say that was a really clear presentation, particularly no slides. That's much appreciated, but real information. Although I'm still intrigued about what nominals are. Anyway, I'm going to turn to can I just remind my colleagues that we can ask very concise questions tonight. We've got a long agenda, and I know particularly when we talk about policing, it's tempting to be a bit anecdotal, but let's try and hone our questions down. And I'm going to start now, work my way around.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask, if I may, about Operation Northleaf. And I suppose it's really more of a point than a question. We used to have very good community engagement around that in the early days. And then more recently, there was a press conference, I think it was in May.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of the council were informed of that beforehand, but I know the community were not. And I'm wondering whether there can be perhaps better engagement with the community to prepare them for news such as was delivered in May in terms of the time frame.
Yeah, it's feedback that I'll take to the North Three teams. They sit away from the borough policing and stuff. So I know in the run up to that release, because I think the information that was released was actually really detailed, wasn't it? It was not in there, which is really positive in terms of showing as much information as possible. I know there was engagement with bereaved survivors and relatives as well. in the run-up, so it didn't come out of nowhere. But I'll take that feedback to the superintendent that comments through. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Toby.
Thank you. Actually, just to headline it in those Portobello Market reports, of, very much are appreciated. So this is just sort of to bounce off, because we've seen a lot of data of crime by ward. It's not really directly in this report here, but I think probably we'll have an idea about it. And I suppose, so my question is really about the different types of, and Mary has asked us not to be too anecdotal. So, but the thing is, I live in Goulburn, I live in Anfield House, right where there's firearms discharge, and there was a fatal stabbing very recently. And so when you talk about concentration of crimes against people, the other one, of course, is Portobello, but that is largely around a lot of commerce and all of that. We have a very engaged people there. But my experience in Goulburn, I think people's experience in Goulburn, is that you're more likely to see police, which is going to be a van of officers that won't tell you their name. And again, I'm being anecdotal here, but they will essentially, in my view, antagonise a young guy. I've spoken to ward, community police about this, and who have actually seemed to be very much kind of take my side of it, right? And it is something trying to factor out. So my question is, how directly are we tackling this? Is it to do with the types of crimes that are being reported more in different wards, and what relationship do local community officers have with, say, these? So I understand that's Met wide. You've got there's a lot of terrorism legislation that's allowing a lot of it. So that seems to be very separate to the kind of policing that I actually like, and I'll talk to our local officers in the street and all of that. Very, very different. So that's could you speak a little bit about it?
Yes.
Yes, it's a really interesting point. So I went to a youth club one evening a few months ago, and it's part of our community monitoring group. So a community monitoring group, which looks to stop and search. It's not chaired by the police; it's a community-led group, and the whole idea is that it scrutinises publicly and reviews how we do stop and search, and it involves members of the public watching our body-worn video as well to see our interactions. And the general feedback was actually stop and search is generally the most challenging time for our interactions with young people, and that's their feedback, which is really interesting to hear. And they said exactly the same thing for me. They said if a local officer will stop them, it's a different experience to somebody who's not involved in the borough. So the way that we task our asset is we have our neighbours teams that are permanently assigned to boroughs, but we, as the leaders on the borough and the BCU, can bid for central support from central asset to come help us. So a good example of that is after the shooting in Goulburn, we request further asset in to assist us with diffusing tension sometimes, but also being potentially quite robust with some policing as well, to make sure we don't have an escalation in violence. But always alongside that will be engagement from the neighbourhood teams. It is feedback that we've had not just on this borough, it's across London, but there is really heavy scrutiny on how stop search is used, and body-worn video is reviewed on how we engage, particularly young people. I think part of it is that generally these teams are brought in at a time of potential crisis sometimes, and because of that, the stance and approach is that we take a more robust level of measures that we might do previously. So there might be, for example, a section 60 put in place, which gives enhanced stop and search powers. And actually, when you look at that, you don't need to have the large number of grounds that you need on a normal stop and search. So because of that, it can cause community tension. We use that community monitoring group to get that feedback, and that does go back into those teams. So there is a lot of training around stop and search, and we're really careful about how we deploy those assets in. Really careful.
Thank you.
So in recognition of that feedback that's come from other councillors in different parts of London as well, we've also had access to our Chief Scientific Officer, Professor Larry Sherman, who comes with lots of experience working in an evidence-based way with procedural justice. So he has started to roll out training to London and London Hertfordshire. Actually, this BC was prioritised for procedural justice processes, and that includes things like actually just saying thank you at the end of the search to an individual, and the option to speak to mum and dad and explain what's happened afterwards, just to give that reassurance at the end of the stop. It's a very small thing for us, but actually a big deal for a young, usually boy, that's been stopped, to actually have a cop say at the end of the search, "We found nothing. Are you okay? Thank you very much for your patience. Sorry to have disrupted your journey." And that is rolling out, and that will be evaluated at the end of the training to see how effective it's been.
We have youth engagement like officers that work with young people deliberately. And one of the things that I found quite shocking when I spoke to them was that they didn't know how to raise a complaint. So they didn't know if you were a bad experience, how would you make that complaint? People didn't know. So that's what our youth engagement teams are really trying to do.
It's one of the phones coming out.
Yeah, but then and that's, we really try and encourage people to know their rights. And our youth teams do that because they work on a different level to some of our officers. They always work in plain clothes. They do community engagement on a different level, with football tournaments and community cook-offs and all sorts of things that are just really sort of a leveller. People speaking on a different way.
Thank you, Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. I've got a couple of quick questions. First one is in terms of the neighbourhood policing and the administration done when someone's been arrested and taken off the streets. When we heard last year at the crime and anti-social paper summit, when a police officer makes an arrest, they come into they can find a police station, they come into a police station to do all the paperwork, and they may not go back out again for the rest of their shift. I think TSG are the only group that they make an arrest, come in and go back out again. Has that been changed specifically here? Because that was something that was mentioned last year. And then the second question is on page 97, bullet point 1, in terms of attracting and retaining staff. You obviously need staff so you can do the job. We're noticing that you've got huge deficit of people who are massively under-recruited. I want to hear a bit about what you're doing to try and tackle that, specifically how the knock-on effects of getting more neighbourhood police in this borough will shape that.
Handing over of people who've been arrested. So Lucy's teams, for example, public protection. So if one of our officers arrested somebody for a domestic abuse case, for example, or rape, it would be handed to Lucy's specialist teams that would take that on. So that would happen. If one of my neighbourhood officers, for example, arrests somebody for a neighbourhood crime, so if they're from a motor vehicle, they would keep that crime and investigate it. I think there's pros and cons to that. So it does mean that they are actually inside doing the work, but then actually what they're doing is seeing that crime all the way through to its conclusion and then working in the community afterwards. And also, if they then recognise that person and that person knows the neighbourhood teams, and there's a different dynamic that starts to emerge. But we do generally, so if a response team officer goes to London Hardcore and arrests someone for any offence, they're generally handing it over. That is generally what happens. Some of the challenges are around custody wait times. We've invested in our detention services, so they are actually quicker now. They are coming down our wait times in custody, so to make it quicker. So in short, yes, is the answer.
And then sort of retention of staff, is the start point.
I was only going to just add, sorry, just give you a bit of context. So for me, that the quality of the handover and the reporting by that arresting officer is critical, particularly for some of the cases that my teams manage. You can imagine they dealt with that domestic incident unfolding in front of them, or dealt with that allegation of rape. The way that they report, write the report up, deal with any safeguarding questions and actions that need to be done, seizing evidence and making sure that is recorded and booked in appropriately. You're right that sometimes that can feel like a long time. I think for me it comes down to really robust supervision of officers. What are you still doing here? Your colleagues finishing off the reports. We need to get back out on the streets. So the point I'm making is that the quality of the handover is very important, particularly when my staff are picking up those cases, and my colleagues in local investigations are picking up those cases that require secondary investigation by a specialist team. But you're absolutely right that we need to sort of make sure that people aren't dithering and taking too long and sort of hanging on for a friend. Let's be sensible and make the best of our 8 hours at work and make sure that we're being being affected and being engaged for that amount of time. So,
Yes, I would like to add that some victims don't actually like speaking to multiple officers. They want to know that the officer I spoke to at the scene or came to my house, the same officer I'm going to speak to get updates from. So we do get conflicting feedback about actually the approach we should be taking to this. But I acknowledge that we need to be efficient and effective with the staff we've got. In relation to your comments about recruitment, there should have been an email that was sent out and a letter, accompanying a letter from our commissioner to the execs this week actually about a new recruitment campaign labelled Be the Change, which is actually asking for colleagues and partners to help with recruitment of staff. And we recognise there is a challenge around this, particularly with the current recruitment in London for all public sectors that's being challenged, but particularly policing and the branding issues we've had for some time now. So that has started. There will be social media campaigns going out, stuff on the tubes and buses that you should see soon. Alright, thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Chief Superintendent, thank you very much for your presentation, and picking up on a few things that Superintendent Ramsden was mentioning, and I think you're absolutely on the right lines of the new map for London, and well done for the start. I'd like to ask, well, firstly, to what extent the extra leadership you've got is going to enable the teams to be visible on the street more than they have been, please, and particularly welcome your special operation in Redcliffe Ward about cycling on the pavements and speeding on the back roads. Well, maybe they weren't your focuses, but they certainly would be in Courtfield next door. I'm sure my colleague from Redcliffe will be very happy with your operation in his ward. But if there's one thing that my residents say in Courtfield about low-level crime, it's that it's cycling on the pavements and speeding on the back streets. So we would very much welcome more of those operations, and I no doubt I'm not the only ward here represented that would have that.
There's a big queue on those, yeah.
Finally, the Courtfield ward appeared on the national list of shame about 4 months ago as number 2 in the whole of England and Wales as a ward that in the last accounting period ending September 2023, not a single theft of a motor vehicle was solved. And there were several wards in the country where not a theft, no thefts were solved, and we were second by volume, I think, in those. So it was a national list of shame. It was extremely embarrassing, but also my residents tell me that it's very expensive to insure certain types of vehicle. I think one of my residents in Evelyn Gardens said his neighbour was quoted £12,000 for annual insurance for a Range Rover. So that's clearly a problem. So what would you like to say in response to that?
So I'll start with the extra leadership point. So what the extra leadership point gives us in terms of enabling visibility is it's raising standards across the board. So the new Met London and KCG is all about raising standards, and that has a real knock-on effect where you've got your sergeant with you all the time, so you're seeing them every day, you're getting tasked properly, and you've got somebody, a leader with you in the building every day, making sure you're doing the right thing. Now, I know most of officers will do that anyway, but we need that reassurance. We've got people in the right places. So that is the knock-on effect. And what that also means is that whereas you had one person potentially looking at 4 wards and reporting back into us what was going on, which I think is actually a really difficult thing to do with 4 wards, you've now got the opportunity for them to know the wards better, know their local people better, and also be more representative on their ward panels and be more involved. That ultimately leads to better visibility and better taskings, which is what we're after. In terms of theft of motor vehicles, so theft of motor vehicles has been a real challenge for us. I'm really conscious that the statistic in the pack is all motor vehicles, so it includes everything. But theft of motor vehicle can be as a result of organised crime, which is beyond the capability of my ward teams to deal with. And what we are doing is, I think this is from the Commissioner, is that our specialist crime units are realigning themselves back towards local priorities. So actually, we should be, as the local policing teams, being more demanding of their services, which is happening. That's going to take time for that to come through. I know the knock-on effect, and I know people who've said exactly the same things to me about the insurance costs across London. And some insurers won't insure certain cars for that reason. That means we've got to get something right. And it goes back to what I was saying, like, you've got to respond to what local concerns are. And if the fear is you have your vehicle stolen, then we need to respond to that. Part of what we're doing, so I mentioned the operation we did around 40 vehicles being stopped. Officers are giving out Faraday bags now to people when they see them, when they meet them, giving them out and helping them with that crime prevention advice. That's a stopgap, I think, because it's putting it on the potential victim to sort it out. But it's all part of starting the conversation and getting it going. I know my officers are on community WhatsApp groups as well, which I think is really helpful because they're part of those local WhatsApp groups to talk to people and make sure we're sharing information as much as possible. But I'm as disappointed as you are that call for was on the list. But I'll take it back to the war team as well and make sure they're really thinking about it and also being that demanding customer of specialist crime as well.
Good, thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you. I think it's been fascinating. I've actually got 3 questions and probably one for each of you. I'd like to ask you about the fact that we have Westminster in the midst. And when you look at all the stats and you look at sheer resourcing, should that not be its own BCU? Because frankly, we'd be better twinned or tripleted with another borough that matches our profile much more. And also on that, the distractions and how do we minimise those? Because my concern when I look at the figures in stats is that I see we've got X number of people, but if you put that on a 24-hour clock, actually probably there's 1 or 2 on the streets, and then if you add distraction onto that, you actually reduce that even further. That's possibly 1 across 3. So actually, how can we improve or how can we minimise distractions and make sure we have as much shifts? And then my final question is reporting on ASB and domestic violence. I am very, I know there's so much more ASB than we actually have in report. How do we encourage people to report it? And with domestic violence, without a doubt, there is much more domestic violence, but it just doesn't get reported. How can we up that so that actually there's statistics are reflection of what's actually going on?
Okay, so I'd take the question about BCU for the model. So I'm sure you're aware, Councillor, when this model was designed, it was a time of extreme cost saving. But also look at how we can do things better and more efficiently with the staff that we had. In an ideal world, personally, yes, I would like to see that go back. But however, there have been some benefits, and actually in terms of spreading skill set and knowledge across a wider part of London, we've definitely benefited, I would say. And also actually the uplift we've had as a BCU has come from the fact that we are twinned or tripleted with Westminster. So there will be times actually, and I know Aaron will answer the question about extractions though, but when we've not needed the staff in Westminster for a particular event, they've actually been redeployed into this BCU, which is when, as Councillor Benson mentioned earlier, we'll end up with people who don't normally work in this area here. It's because we've seen that uplift. So whilst there are some challenges to the look and feel of it being local, I think there has been some other benefits actually in the skill set that has been spread across the whole BCU.
I'll talk about abstraction. So the Commission said at the London Policing Board a while ago, the volume and intensity of protest has bent us out of shape. And I think what that looks like in reality is that we have ward officers not on their wards. And we have teams that are stripped back in order to facilitate or make people safe on gatherings or protests in central London. There's been recognition actually that if this is going to become the new norm, and we're going to continue, and we've talked about recruitment and retention challenges, we're going to have to be more efficient in how we potentially police. And like Marma said, one of the ways of doing that is where there's officers on an operation, but they're not currently needed. It's local policing that's sending them to certain areas. So a good example of that is football, where you might have officers on reserve. We're putting them into ASB hotspots and getting that visibility up, getting them off and out of their vehicles and walking around. Because even just for a few hours, we know that can have a huge impact. So that is happening. The other thing that's happening is the new Commander for Public Order is reviewing our deployment volume. So actually scaling back the amount of resources we put on it in the first place, which is a change, I think. And the benefit of that is that that's somebody who was on a BCU not long ago, leading that operation. So they know the pressures that we're under. And that's a real reality that's going across. And we are starting to see the benefit of that. But the volume and intensity of protest is really challenging.
In relation to domestic abuse and the underreporting, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's probably the tip of the iceberg. which is tragic. So there's an awful lot of victim survivors who are putting up with this abuse, all the time. So my thoughts on that are, for me, it really does cut to the trust and confidence people have in policing to deal with their particular issues and what's happening for them and their lived experience. So for me, it's about getting that response right from the first 999 call to the first officer on the scene, to then colleague of mine within the community safety unit dealing in a really professional and compassionate way, that victim and survivor having a good experience of police. Whether that ends up in a criminal justice outcome or not is really neither here nor there. It's about looking at that particular case and making sure we deal appropriately. And I think by getting it right from here on in around that response, we then hope that people then say, actually, the police were really good when I made my allegation. I felt safe and listened to, and was talked about procedural justice being empowered to be part of that decision making. The other really key bit for me, I think, is using our specialist support services. We've got really good links into specialist services on this borough, and of course BCU from my department with Standing Together, Advance and others. And I suppose the other last bit is just about being innovative. And so I went to the BAME Health Forum recently, which is a bit of a spin-off from the Safeguarding Adult Board, and met with representatives from many different communities, and potentially communities where historically we had underreporting of domestic abuse. And it was a really good opportunity to use some of my officers to explain what we do in my department and how we can support people living with domestic abuse. Because again, it's not just about the victims of it's about our families, about children and the impact of it. So I don't think it's an easy answer. I think it's probably many faceted, but I think we do need to be potentially a bit more innovative about also making it easy for people to report. So whether that's at the local library or we look at other places where people can put in third-party reports. But I don't disagree with you. I think what we know about is frankly massively underreported, which is really, really sad. And as I said in my initial talk, for me that behind closed doors offending is really that very, very hard area to really impact. So lots of things we can do, but very difficult.
Sorry, can I just quickly touch on ASB? Because we didn't cover ASB, did we? Is that all right? Is that okay? Just 1 minute, I'll be very quick. So ASB is one of those figures. Reported ASB, if it goes up, I'm actually pleased because I know it's underreported. So if people are reporting it to us more, that's a good thing. What we're looking at the minute with colleagues in local authority is almost a community one-stop shop. So you walk in and it's in the local community in a accessible place, and you will see police, street enforcement team, you will see community safety there, and we will solve your problem. And I think that's what ASB needs as a problem-solving approach. So it may not be criminality, but it is something that as the public services we should all work together to try and sort out. What I don't want is people coming into Kensington Police Station or Royalty Studios, report ASB and then walking away feeling like it hasn't been solved or someone hasn't done something about it. I think this is an opportunity maybe, and we're going to trial it potentially to see if we can do that, where someone will walk in and then walk out with people solving their problem and knowing who to go to. I'll report back next year, but it will hopefully. That's the approach, and it's that shoulder-to-shoulder approach that we really trying to go for on the borough.
The word many councillors.
Thank you. Will.
First of all, I welcome the recollection of Field's principles, putting community at the centre of the report. Please, we're just going to ask you to reflect on the experience of working with RBKC at a ward and community level, which you said over the last 6 months since the street enforcement team in place. How could this be improved? And is there a role for further along the community, bearing in mind we've got somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 of these things being carried around by the community all the time. And there have been instances of cases where they have been used by police for evidence. Is there a way that could be systematized and the community individuals could do reporting through a properly governance procedure to aid in building, REI images of where things, are problems are. And that includes mobile phones, ring bells, social media groups, and such like, because these are realities of life now, and they're embedded in the communities. And how can the experience of the, alongside that, how can the experience of the Kings Road Partnership and their approach to ASB and crime be helped Met and ourselves develop a better local best practice?
Okay, so I'll start with the work we're doing with council colleagues and the street enforcement team. So if I'm reflecting completely honest with Lee, I think the start of this year, we've seen a real step change in how we're working together. I think that is a collateral from the fact that we've got more sergeants that can lead on that and better capability. But we are, I think, more aligned now than we've ever been. My relationship, my partner working relationship with colleagues in community safety is excellent, and I know that's not necessarily the same across London. We are really well aligned, work really well together. And so, for example, today we had a meeting with head of community safety, head of the street enforcement team to talk about what are the issues from my priorities, but also their priorities, because actually we need to all be seeing where we overlap and where we can help each other out. That's so constructive, and that we are seeing the results of that. Where I think we need to do a bit better, and we talked about it today, I think there needs to be more joint patrolling. So we actually support each other a bit better. And that's something we've taken away as an action today, actually, to improve that, where we are communicating a bit better where we're going to be, and we get our teams working together. Again, that shoulder-to-shoulder problem-solving approach, people see that. If I lived in some of these areas, I would feel reassured to see people out together like that, working hand in hand. The reporting of problems, so reporting crime now, in some ways, there's never been as much evidence available now as there's ever been. Challenge of that is actually getting it. It's really, so for example, a theft of a motorcycle, there can be ring doorbells all the way along the road that all need checking. That's a huge amount of time to invest. One of the things we've changed now is we've brought in a system where members of the public can upload their footage onto the system themselves. So we don't have to have an officer go and necessarily collect it, can be uploaded through. So then that's where we're actually investing. We are bringing that in. The use of AI is very early days in this. Huge opportunity. And I think that will come through. And Mum just has talked about some of the evidence-based policing and the more scientific approach. I think that will all be encompassed within that, where we started to be a bit more scientific, I suppose, in the way we're doing things. So it's exciting, but also quite terrifying for someone who's a technophobe. Kings Road Partnership, I work really well with Kings Road Partnership. They are a really key ally for us, and we work really well. Some of the things that we do that I think are really effective. So members of the Kings Road Partnership will sit on our CBO panel. So they're involved in the CBO panel. And one of the things that we've really driven over the last year is that we share data really effectively. What we found is their membership will have a real goldmine of information for us. They know the local people, the local Cobham people, they know them almost as well as we do, and sharing that information. So that's why we brought them in with an agreement on sharing data where they're part of our CBO panel, which is really important. So that's some of the good work. I know we are locally working really closely with them. One of the things that we've done as a result of their feedback was there's a fear of people who work in retail premises on the Kings Road going to court, because there's just a feeling that it's really intimidating and the unknown. As a result of that, we've produced information that is going out to every retailer to explain the process and give them more information. That's directly as a result of what they've told us. So that's where they're really useful, and that relationship is so good. When we're telling each other how things are, we're actually mutually improving. So it's really good. Really.
Thank you.
Pretty.
Thank you and welcome. It was comforting news to hear about Bushborough Road, so thank you all. I know my colleague Councillor Pascal just mentioned about reporting. I find in our ward, Camden ward, is people always find the accessibility to police stations and getting hold of someone would be quite difficult. And it's once you get through it, it's quite a lengthy process. And you're one's given a sort of crime reference number, and that's it. Nobody ever hears from anyone. So there's almost a bit of an apathy from residents thinking, you know what, it's not worth it. First, you can't get it. time wasting exercise. And of course, I mean, needless to say that with many police stations being closed down, that just adds to one's grievance. So that's my first one. And on the stop and search, I would love to know, do you have any data of how effective it has been? And you said it's challenging, the reception is, it's a bit uneven, but I would love to know, if you have any data, how effective it is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So closure of police stations is really emotive subject. Every community meeting I do, it comes up, Nottingham police station, in some shape or form. The estate strategy at the moment is being reviewed. Part of the consideration around that is the digital world is, we're in a different place, aren't we? And reporting online, and talk back to your point around ease of reporting, use of phone is more used now than it ever was. I use my nan as an example, that she uses a phone, that mind blowing. But so there's a changing environment. So that comes back to my point. I think we need to be a bit more agile in what we do. With limited officer numbers, I'm not sure an officer sat in a police station on the front counter is the best use of their time at times. And a lot of people would rather be walking around the street and being approachable and accessible that way. But that's not to say that we shouldn't have front counters. And that's where that idea around that community one-stop shop at a time when the community wants to be there, well advertised, so it's more advertised, that I think will deliver that accessibility that people are after. I hope that's what we're looking for. To stop a search, so I came armed with some so kids in Chelsea, so our positive outcome rate, so that's either there's somebody who's arrested or there's a community resolution, which is basically a warning. It's 29% of our stop and searches. So 29 of our stop and searches result in that. Of that, an arrest is 12.8%. 12.8% isn't results in an arrest. So I think there's always improvements that can be made, and it's slightly below the Met average actually, but it's 29% is pretty good actually for what we do. Having said that, it goes back to the points before. If there's a poor experience, stop and search, the community trauma individually and wider is massive, and it burns trust really quickly. So I'm really conscious of we can hang our hat on 29% and say we're doing okay, but actually if the way we're doing it is not right, then that actually means very little because we're actually burning trust really quickly. So it all feeds into that community monitoring group, how we do it, but also what's the outcomes at the end.
Can I just pick up on one aspect of Pretty's question as my only question, which is the feedback. So we talked about accessibility, and I do think there's something to address in terms of the forms that you find online. They're so annoying, it's not sure. That needs to be addressed, but also then the feedback. You report something, you get a crime number, as Pretty says, and then you never hear anything. And that's very demotivating for people, even if it says, we're really sorry, we couldn't find the culprit. I'm going to have to close the case. That would be better than deafening silence. Are there any plans to try and tidy that up?
So I got some really interesting feedback as community that, and apparently I'm not seeing it. Apparently on the form it says this will take at least 20 minutes to complete. And people said that's going to put people off straight away if you say that. So I have fed that back, which is a really interesting point. But again, we should be responding to that and maybe changing the way we're doing it. What we are looking at, and it's being looked at centrally, is a victim care hub. So I actually think we often don't show our working out. So I do think people understand that we're not going to catch everybody. I've been a victim of burglary, and I knew it was really unlikely. I did know that, but I did want to know that forensics had been completed. And we looked at CCTV, and there were 3 cars that had turned up and looked for the person as it happened. We need to do more of that. That's that feedback loop. An example of that is the recent really horrific robbery in Chelsea. We deployed a lot of people to that, including a helicopter, our response teams, responsive. We did a lot, but we didn't tell people we did that. It's showing our working out. The answer might not be the right one, but it's actually showing our working out because there's so much hard work that's going on. We're doing that at the ward level. We've gone back to basics, to be honest. Newsletters do work, whether it's digital or physical, they do work. So we're going back to that. Charlie Legg is one of my spokesmen, some fantastic work on that around revamping those, getting them back out, making sure they've got all the contact details in again. You know, I get them through my door and I do look at it. I'm in police, and I do look at it. People do look at it, even if it's just for a short period of time. So going back to that local feedback loop, but showing I'm working out a bit more.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to draw this to a conclusion. I think it's been a really positive session. I think you've shown your best to us, and it's been really, really helpful. And what I really hope is that all three of you will be back next year, because we love continuity very much. Appreciate having Owen, and we hope to see all three of you again. And on that,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We're going to move on to agenda item A5, which is service standards. Johnny knows that. And thank you to Stuart for coming as well. And Sarah, sorry. I was going to stay around in the evening. It's a nice so you could hear more of your husband. I'm going now. What do you want to do as an intro to this?
Sure, I can do an intro. I think I was just going to start by, as I always do when I talk about service standards, thanking Sophie and the team who helped produce them, and also particular tributes to the residents with whom we co-designed the standards. We were fortunate enough to go to the local government conference recently, and some of the residents joined us because it really was co-design, and it was important, I think, to have them just as included there as they were in the production. So I want to have on record my thanks again to them. I think the service standards are a big part of our culture change agenda. It should set the terms of engagement for how we interact with our residents and our businesses and our voluntary organisations. And the standards I think that we have are clear, engaging and fair. And that makes sense because I think the process that we went through was one that kind of took a lot of feedback from people from different backgrounds and lived experiences. But this is the key. I think they live or die by the success of this process of embedding them across the organisation. And we need buy-in and active participation in the embedding of these standards across the council. So this committee is part of that. Everybody in this room is part of that. But my message to people in this council is that everyone is. So whether you're on the front desk or the third floor, whether you're in Wilson Road or Pembroke Road or Chelsea Old Town Hall, or if you bump into a resident on the street, you are at all times part of the face of the council. We are collectively. And so in that context, I think there's some good progress in the report in front of us. You can see that just over half of the actions that we've outlined have some good progress, and I think there are good signs in the maturity assessments. Although we need to keep prodding some directorates to play their full part in that process. And so there is more to do. I think in terms of things that are currently a challenge but could unlock further progress, the CRM is a good example of something that can help us improve customer experience over the next year, 2 years, and thereafter. So I think good start, lots more to do, and some green shoots in terms of projects like the CRM in terms of how we can improve.
Thank you. Unless anyone's got anything else, I'm going to start with precincts. So I'm going to go around the other way and actually submit.
Okay,
Not ready, I'll start with Will. I start with
yes,
yours.
please do, thank you.
Will, sorry.
I was going to say, maybe it's putting it rather rudely to say that it's security, my reading this report, in the sense that there's a heroic effort's been made, but it sort of got the feeling that we've only just reached base camp, and that there's an awful long way still to go. I was going to start with the CRM, which is crucial to a lot of the improvements. And that programme, as I understand it, is already not quite on programme, despite that we brought somebody in to help us do better than the last time and the time before. The website is still easier to Google in rather than going through a front page. And at a more local level, we need to recruit and embed our boards in the areas. So at various different levels. There are some high points though. I'm a governor of 2 schools, and the standards improvement rigorous and very, very thorough. So my question is as to how we can actually speed up, embed, and get the culture across the whole. That is a good point to make. So how do you get those? How do you get those departments that are not on board yet? And it really, I suppose, is demand from the top of the leadership of the council, both on leadership team, but also the officer side.
Would you like to comment on that?
I can start. Why don't you colour inside the lines once that starts to draw them? I'm not sure I agree with some of your question in terms of us being at base camp. I think we're further along than base camp. I think we have a clear set of service standards which we didn't have before. I think they've been broadly welcomed by our communities, which is something we didn't have before. There is, of course, more that we want to do. I'm not sure I agree that the CRM has been knocked off track by kind of a lack of will on the part of the council or a lack of guile. I think we've been working pretty well to keep our delivery partner on track. There are sometimes challenges working with a delivery partner, and once we enter a discovery phase, we can't be certain of what will emerge from that. So there are necessary moments in which we have to take stock. But I think the potential for how that can improve our services is huge. In terms of kind of how can we embed this further in the organisation, I think bringing it to meetings like this is quite powerful because members have to be part of that agenda. But I also think you're right, council leadership, me as a lead member, I know Elizabeth is behind all of this too, and so are senior officers. I think one of the reasons maturity assessments are quite an important element of it is because it's about getting senior staff in each department to take stock of where we are and where we're going and how it can be improved. And it also gets every officer to think about how the customer experience has been working against kind of the metrics that are set out in the service standards. So I think there is a lot of progress. I accept there's work to do. We'd always like these things to be quicker.
No, I think your point is right that discussions at meetings like this is as part of that process. It's really important because it brings it all back into sharp focus when there are so many priorities around the organisation. Just kind of moving our attention, our gaze back to this again is really helpful. So these kind of discussions, this scrutiny, this challenge, I was really encouraged that the members have all said they wanted to be part of the lead member briefings to understand when maturity assessments are. And I know when we went to EMT with an update, the directors all took personal responsibility for making sure it was part of the communication we did with the organisation and how they were engaged with the process of, what these activities are. There's a kind of range of activities in here that we hope across them will hit different parts of the organisation in a way that works for them. And I think the kind of appendices hopefully give you a sight into some of the mechanics behind that. But ultimately, as Johnny says, this is about changing the culture and kind of infecting the organisation. And we're just working away at that. And the more attention and focus that we have on that at all levels, I think helps.
Thank you. Tracy, back to you. Thank you. I had, on maturity assessments, one thing that I felt slightly uncomfortable with is about the self-assessment. And I know it's not started yet because you didn't want to rock the balance between, collegiate working. But I did think self-assessment is a bit like marking one's own homework. So I just, wondered what your talk was on that. The other thing you also mentioned is there have been a few IT or GT&T delays. So some of the ones that you wanted to complete haven't been done. I just wondered if you know what the impact of that has been and the cost, and any data on all the action trackers, all the issues that you're trying to deal with. Do we have any data of what has been completed, how effective that's been compared to the time invested in on all of these issues?
Why don't I'll have a self-assessment and then you cover some of the data points. I think what I would say about that is that I I share your kind of natural skepticism of self-assessment, and I think if in a vacuum it's kind of the feedback on which we base our performance, then that would be insufficient. But I think as part of a kind of a package of things that we're doing to understand how residents are experiencing our services, it can be useful. I think there's value in encouraging officers to think critically about their own work, and to challenge one another in terms of the scores that we can see here. So I think as one of a range of things we're doing, there is a value, but I really go along with that. It shouldn't be, the sum of that work.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are facilitated in that process. And we've got in detail of the appendices, which I know are very, my apologies for that, but it shows that what we ask them to do is look at what immature would look like and what mature would look like, and then really reflect on where they are. I'm slightly encouraged that they're not all coming out with 5s. Then I would be really nervous. So I think there's a degree of honesty that environment is giving that we kind of encouraged to see. So there is one thing which is really not a DD&T issue. It's one of the tools I think you're referring to.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges we have got as an organisation, and we're still trying to think this through because it's come up as we've looked at No Wrong Front Door as well, is that if we want to resolve as much as we can with a resident when they contact us in the first instance, often that means that the person who's dealing with them needs a range of information at their fingertips, which might be just about who to contact about a specific issue that needs following up. And staff are saying that that's not always easy to have at their fingertips. So we're trying to look at some of the Microsoft tools that allow you to develop a profile that people can search. And Delve has a Microsoft tool for that, but it's about to be retired. We did pilot it in a small but it didn't quite do what we wanted anyway. So we're just back to the drawing board, not in terms of our own inability to deliver something, but actually trying to find the right tool for people to share knowledge across an organisation, which is really difficult when it's a large organisation, I think. And then in terms of the impact, in Appendix C, where we start to check out, set out some of the data, I think data availability is one of our issues. And as some of these actions in the implementation plan are rolled out, like surveys as a standard across different areas and CRM and kind of customer feedback measures, we will see this data increasing. And we will see trend data over time, which you'll notice. I mean, partly this is here to demonstrate to you that actually we're only just starting to get this data coming in rather than what the data is telling you. But as we see it over a timeline, we will be able to start to track where something happens and what we can see in the difference of that. There is more detail behind this that we look at in our services that gives us much more insight into some of the specific issues people are raising. But I think what we're trying to do is make sure we've got better data over time so that we can see when something went live on a website or when we implemented a system and changed a process, what was the impact on that in terms of the response of residents and how they experienced it and the time it took. So we've got a number of tools, but we need to improve the data, and that's a big push for us.
Thank you.
Diana. My concern is twofold. One, when you get to the next paper, which is all about transformation of savings, that in this paper it's very clear that residents want more interaction, want more officer to resident face to face, and yet the next paper about transformation of services is all moving about to AI and more automation. And so I'm struggling to see whether, in fact, by the time this comes through, it will be out of sync with where the council wants to be. And my second point was council involvement. So I looked at this and I thought, this is all residents, this is staff, but actually where's the councillor element? And certainly there are lots of those similarities, but we don't know who to ask. And we run around trying to find out who. And so you get on your website and you're none the further. So I felt it would be good if you could actually maybe take a workshop of councillors for them.
Yeah, that's exactly what you asked us to do.
It is.
So he didn't say it was that as an action. No, it was just a research question.
Yeah, and yeah, and hopefully we can do that quickly.
And the first question about the
so I think there is a line, there's a kind of fine balance between when automation can
distance people from an organisation, or when actually it just makes that smoother transaction. There will be a group living in the borough who want to do things without speaking to someone. And I know that for a fact because I analyse the data that comes through for people who phone us and people who use our web services. And largely what we see is there are a large group of people who said, great to speak to the person on the phone, they were really nice, but actually I didn't want to do this at all. I tried to do it online and I couldn't. So we know there will be a natural shift towards that. And for many services that will be highly appropriate because they are transactional and they just need to be done. I think the point for us is to make sure for those more complex services or for people who really need that interaction, it's available and the quality is good enough that they don't have to phone back 10 times to get something done. So I think we can do efficiency and improve service because actually if people are phoning up several times for the same task to be done, they're not getting feedback on it. That's inefficient for us. It's it's not a happy experience for them. So I think there is an area in between that we are trying to fill where it is both a better experience and it's more efficient and better for the organisation to do. And that's the holy grail that we're kind of trying to find.
Yeah. I mean, an example of that is the parking service that we're trying to turn into a direct debit system. It's an example of a really high volume service that probably the majority of people with a residential permit don't want to come into the town hall or interact directly with a council officer. And it hopefully will also realise a saving in the medium term as well. There are examples of it, but I think it's an intelligent question because there is a natural tension between people often wanting face-to-face interaction and a council that has to try and do more with less.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. I think angles of my questions have already been and gone, which is good. But can you just say how confident are you that CRM will deliver you want what you need to do?
I'm very confident. I've implemented it before. What it will change is having a database of kind of contacts, so we can kind of look at that and learn from it. It will allow for some of that automation to take place, not just for residents but for staff. At the moment in my services, I have staff who have to consult 3 or 4 different IT systems to deal with one call. And that's clunky and difficult for them and not the best experience for a resident. That can definitely be resolved by what we're looking at. So I think we will see an impact. Absolutely. I cannot wait for it. And the staff will be definitely find life easier. And then we can mirror that out onto residents as well so that they can experience some of that as well.
So where did you implement it before and so
In Merton.
Right, and that's quite recent experience.
Yeah, that was my previous role.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. That's quite reassuring. I won't need to ask any of the rest of my questions.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Chair, just one quick question, but thank you for the report. Page 120, bullet point 3. There's a half-day course for new starters, and you talked about embedding change into an organisation. Would it, in a private sector company, you might do an annual CPD or an annual course or whatever online. Does that sort of information that's a half-day, is that pared down for people who are not new starters? They can be refreshed, be brought up to speed with where the organisation is going in terms of change.
We don't have it. That's a really, really good point, actually, and I think I'd like to take that away. We do have a syllabus that we've developed for all staff, but I don't think we've really factored in a kind of routine upgrade of that, or kind of time to update your analog in that way. So I think I'd like to take that away as a suggestion. But we have developed a range of courses that are a syllabus for everybody, whether you're a new starter or not. I think the idea, we worked with HR colleagues on this, was that it needs to be part of the employee life cycle so that recruitment takes account of this, onboarding, I think it's called now, isn't it? Takes account of, how we expect people to operate. And then the training is available through their time within the organisation. But if I could take that away as a kind of routine update on training like we do with data protection and other training, I think that would be a really good way of minds.
Yet another example of how Itchen has lost its relevance again.
So have you got any questions? No?
Thank you. Going through the report, and then sort of finding that things that I find maybe less substantive and measurable than I would like. Actually, what I find is I'm going back to the co-design service standard. That's what I against that. And with respect, genuinely with respect, I hate this. I hate this whole thing because, well, and it's partly because there is a definition of co-design that we don't use. And it's and just by way of, this is quite timely actually, because by way of comparison, we recently has been looking at the Trellick and Eden community, which I don't know if it's come across anyone's desk yet, and which I think is and it's a different subject. It's about the estates, about Trellick and Eden and what they want to move forward. And that was put together through 4 resident workshops and just describe it as community vision is not a detailed plan, but a flexible document with a set of code use principles and ideas to guide future development. And compared to this, where you have it all sort of boils down to what a resident feels. Really, as a resident, I want to feel a certain way. If you look at something like this, it's like here are the key priorities: new homes, care infrastructure, community spaces, and then on from that, what that would look like. And the key thing is that it's regularly revisited, and it's not what you need to do because we don't know what we need to do. Anyway, this is all a little bit long-winded, characteristic probably. But so my question is that I mean, given someone like me, I'm very cynical about us going back to a document like this. Is there any? I'd like to see us move more towards what I consider co-design, which is what I sort of more along what I just described. I don't know who was involved in drafting this, and I do feel that my experience of it is that they are somewhat siloed and they are guided from the top from us, however good our intentions are, and I think people generally do have good intentions.
So are you asking about how this came to be? Because we're actually at this sort of implementation stage now.
I understand.
We're sort of slightly past the thing. Are you asking about the original design and co-design?
Yeah, well, this isn't co-design. Is my assertion. But yeah, this is because, like I say, there has been definitions of the 1970s that we haven't adopted. So my question is, I suppose, moving forward is to actually revisit those principles against which we measure future assessments, future self-assessment.
Just can you answer that one?
Yeah, so I don't know what the definition of co-design is that you're using, and I'd be really interested for you to share with me. These were written by residents in the room who went along to, we were recruited through a recruitment program and then a kind of demographic profiling to make sure it represented the demographics of the organisation, and then over a period of 6 workshops that were facilitated by a voluntary sector representative from within the borough. This is what they developed. I do think there's a challenge in co-design, is that actually when you take a blank piece of paper to residents, what they give you is what they give you, and this is what they've kind of told us is important.
This is why I'd love you to see the
yeah, so that would be great. I'd like to see
that was run with UCL and I think the design one, the museum.
Thank you. Well, can I leave you to pass that on to Sophia, and I'll move on to Claire and Sue.
Thank you. So yes, notwithstanding the question about definitions of co-design, which I think is a bigger question that can be taken, and it applies across the whole council actually, to be fair. I had a couple of questions specific to starting with page 130. And I guess I'm sort of thinking, how are we, when we sample data or input from residents, how are we using that to infer about across the borough? So on page 130, box number 9, raising complaints, it says some residents say there's a fear of reprisal. And this jumped out at me because this is something I see quite a bit in my own casework around housing specifically. And in particular, this box is marked as completed because you have gone back to ADKC, which is where that was first raised. And I just want to sort of make sure that you're aware that that's not the only place where that is an issue. So in terms of reassuring those particular residents, they're putting something in place to the specific people who raised it. It is, I would say, across housing in particular, quite a significant issue that I think is not even just about raising complaints, but about trying to access services. And I wonder if there can be any, and presumably, this can apply to other parts which are completed for in the sense that they were raised, but perhaps may have a wider occurrence or a wider application that we need to be continually to look at.
So if you look as if you're first to respond to that.
Well, so I was just thinking that in a way I kind of wish that didn't say completed because it's only one part of the job, isn't it? It's one part of it, it's the discussion. And then what happens next is what you've learned with that and what you do with the complaints process. So I think we would say, well, we've gone back to people who have told us that they have an issue, and we need now to reflect on how that how that kind of shapes the complaints function. I'm quite excited to say we've got a new complaints manager starting in September. We were very disappointed to lose our previous complaints manager, who was excellent, but recruitment has gone well. So actually there's some fresh thinking coming along to the complaint service, and one of the first tasks for them would be to take this evidence that we've gathered and look at what that means for the process, but also look at what does that mean to how we listen to people when we're kind of starting to hear that there might be something wrong with the process itself, not just the complaint. So I think we're only partway through this piece of work. And what we need to do now is the and so what happens next.
Yeah.
So the completed, I think, is slightly misleading on that.
Yeah,
we've had a conversation.
That's done now. We move on because it's live, it's ongoing, and it's beyond
absolutely
the area where it's been identified. And I just have one more, Mary.
That's
All right. Johnny, you mentioned about in relation to the self-assessment, that there are other items in the package of measures that you're looking at, and you're doing a range of things. And I see we have resident satisfaction surveys as well to assess it. But the point I wanted to really make is on page 151, where it says you're exploring starting a specific annual survey about the service standards. And I just wanted to sort of stress the point. I think that is a really excellent idea. And while you're exploring it, I hope that you very much do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, shall I go past on you as you making it for the beginning? Is that all right?
Okay.
Yeah. And my question really was around the pie chart of maturity assessments. We slightly alluded to it already. I'm slightly shocked that you've got people who haven't replied at all.
Yes.
I mean, I really am actually quite shocked. And also planning but not scheduled. I suspect that applies to wealth of foot dragging as well. And this is, something that the leadership, executive leadership as a council are very keen on.
Yeah. I've written personally to chase up on this to at least one executive director, so I share the frustration that not everybody.
But I really think it was not Maxine here that I just feel that if we can't even do the internal things where we're requiring our staff to respond internally, and we know whether they're responding or not, it's not great. And I just also want to point out in a very painful and annoying way that the figures on that page, on page 19 of the don't add up, the table figures don't add up. And that's the second table in a row, second meeting in a row that has this. Not second one from you, so it was there was another one last night at Hampton. And I just feel that the OSC deserves someone to do some improvement. For the candidates. Thank you very much. Good. Okay. Well, I think we've explored that very thoroughly. Good luck. I'm looking forward to hearing future progress. Yeah. Let's move on to the next paper, which was an update on savings and transformation. Welcome to the paper, everybody.
Well, this is an embarrassment of riches in terms of okay, well, I'll try and be fairly brief then. I have such a wealth of experience to draw on. I mean, fundamentally, this is about modernising our processes and improving the way that we deliver services. So it links on quite neatly to the previous paper. But it's also about addressing our budget gap. We talked before, but just to remind the committee, we've got a gap of between 26 and 40 million pounds over the medium term, and between 10 and 19 million pounds next year. So quite significant. It's a bigger gap than we've known against a harder backdrop than we have known. And so it means that we have to work at real pace. And the transformation programme therefore addresses that. And in terms of the areas that we've been looking at most, we've got staffing, which is, I think, going to be a big part of it. We do have a higher staff to resident ratio than many other London boroughs. Operational estate and trying to use the operational equipment we have as a borough more efficiently to drive service improvement and also rationalise how space is used. Our capital programme, where we can, I think we should seek to reduce the borrowing that we incur, so that we're using cash balances to offset some of that. And I think commercialisation is the fourth of those, and that's kind of about increasing the amounts of revenue the council can generate. I think we need to be mindful in that context of resident experience, because in many respects, residents will feel potentially an impact if it's not done sensitively. So I think that needs to be forefront in our mind. But we also need to be open with people that there is a budget pressure. There are potentially opportunities to do it in ways that residents can bear. And where those two things align, we should seek to do it. I think what I'd say is the transformation programme is progressing well. There are still significant challenges. I'm sure we'll talk about that more over the coming months. But I'm confident that we can close the budget gap and see some service improvement over the next year. And I think probably in years 2, 3, etc., that will ramp up even more, because with kind of rapid redesign of services, sometimes there are lead-in times that are necessary in order to ensure that there isn't an impact in terms of how residents experience our services.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Greg.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Johnny. I was only going to comment really rather than asking any questions. But I think the council should be concentrating on delivering universal services efficiently and also unobtrusively, and be there when people need it. I support your comments, basically your summary of table 3 of the areas that you're looking at, and you really do need to focus on overheads and non-customer facing staff services. The one thing you didn't add, which I think should be there on that list in its own right, is discretionary activities. I was very encouraged when I was having a private meeting with one of the executive directors recently, where he mentioned discretionary activity. That I won't mention what it is because it will probably be up on the list for later in the year in the public forum. But I thought, yes, well, that's the sort of thinking we need to be seeing. There's discretionary activities going on. We need to review whether we should be doing them at all, because that's where we make real estate.
Yeah, I think this is something we talked about in the previous meeting. And
sure it is.
And I think probably the gap that we're describing is between how it's presented in the paper and what's actually happening in practice. Because I think in practice we are looking at discretionary activity. And I know that certainly over the coming week or so, even before recess, there's going to be a forum for the leadership team, but also with the executive management, to talk about are there things that are discretionary that actually aren't fulfilling a purpose, or the purpose is not so significant as to make it wholly necessary, and therefore can we reduce the scope of activities the council undertakes. So I would give you reassurance on that point, but I think we can take the point that we might want to draw attention to it a little bit more in future public facing papers.
I'm sure a lot of these things are nice to do, and they possibly make a good Instagram ask the constant thing, but they're not necessarily delivering core services or benefits.
That's it. And how cynical note, Sydney, can you catch that?
Thank you. Probably not. On page 168, last week, when talking about improved commercialisation, second paragraph at the bottom. The last sentence talks about a much more commercial approach, which could be used to generate extra revenue to fill some of the gap. Can you give us a bit of an example of the sort of things that you might be thinking about there from a more commercial approach, notwithstanding the fact that there are a lot of businesses and looking at neighbouring boroughs as to how they would do what you described as a much more commercial approach, or other things would be considered?
I suppose the first thing in that work stream would probably be something like advertising potentially. We need to be mindful about the sorts of sites we look into, because there will be sites that are more and less sensitive. But if you go into other boroughs in London and you look at a bus shelter, usually there's an advertisement on it. I don't necessarily think that's in principle a problem. And if something, I mean, I give it as an example, you asked for an example. If that is something that the council can do at some pace to increase its revenue and therefore protect service delivery to frontline, then I think that's worth exploring. And it can be done at reasonable scale. Obviously, there are limits to that.
Toby.
I'm going to make it quite broad, I suppose, to answer how you like. I think, particularly with the heat network, I'm speaking as a council then, and there's a concern that what we're, it's certainly the longer term, we're looking at a situation where it seems like the council is essentially profiting from our relationship with council tenants and services and medical services. And like I said, let's keep that broad. So if you sort of comment on what that relationship looks like over the next sort of, I don't know, living period. And do you understand what I'm saying? Like it makes people nervous.
Should I pick that up?
Is that in relation to the heat network paper?
We're
Or is it to the savings and
network paper.
transformation?
We're not,
Well,
we're
we're
not-
on that.
we're on the savings and transformation paper at the moment.
Okay. Well, leave it to
Should we
me.
let's say?
Okay.
Claire,
Claire,
did you have a question on this paper?
I do actually, my first one sort of follows on from what we've just been talking about there on page 168 about the commercial approach. What's in the bullet points about, which to me is very sensible, but I just wanted to, it's calling to mind to me an admission that Barry Quirk made back in the day about the council acting more like a property developer. And I think we need to be quite careful going forwards that we don't have, albeit we do have a need to maximise income, that we're not doing that in a way which appears greedy or inappropriate or makes hardship for residents or businesses.
I agree entirely, and that's the reason I prefaced my remarks about that work stream in the way that I did. I think it's a really important point, and I would never want to see a kind of a two-tier resident experience, because we're introducing new charges in areas that residents haven't previously experienced that mean you can only get the best service if you can pay. That would be an
Yes.
Thank you.
On staffing, I just want to make sure that we don't risk any statutory services or functions of the council. And I'm thinking particularly about licensing and staffing levels within licensing, which I think have been raised by a number of members. So I hope that we will be, when we're thinking about how we can do transformation, that we are making sure that we protect not only the service itself, but also the well-being of the staff who are delivering those functions. And then finally, I just wonder, is there any mechanism to ensure that the council plan and council planning generally is somehow constrained within a reasonable reflection of budgetary pressures, so that we are not being over ambitious and over promising to our residents? Because just to pick an example off the top of my head, the capital programme in housing, for instance, there have been ambitious targets set. And that is used as a justification for things which are proving difficult for residents. And I don't feel that one of the outcomes or effects of the council plan should be that it's a justification for doing things which sound good on paper if there is adequate budget or if they are affordable, but in practice end up making
Who'd like to reflect on that?
unintended consequences.
Yeah. Second. In terms of staffing, I think the intention would always be to protect as far as possible statutory services and to properly resource them. There are going to be challenges, so there'll be some areas where we might have to look at things a little bit differently. licensing itself, I can't speak to the detail of how that workforce is structured. So if you want to come in on that.
Yeah, so following, because you raised the licensing point at the last meeting, and I did go back and find the scrutiny report which referred to it, which firstly, I don't think was particularly appropriate for a scrutiny report because it did start going into detail about people being off sick and that kind of thing. But within, but within the report, so I reflecting your concern, absolutely ask the question about have we got enough staffing and licensing? What's the issue? And the pretty new executive director had a look at it, said that essentially job descriptions have been really, really specific. So and that they were making those a bit more flexible so that the work was more easily covered between the team. So essentially they are moving, but he was going to keep an eye on the resourcing and make sure that the team could do the job that they are required to do.
Thanks, because I think they've lost the post and they need it back, so I just like to make another plea for that.
Yes,
Seriously, because retention is important and this is a statutory function of the council. Thank you very much.
Also, do you have a question on this?
Yes, I've got two. I'll start to one. On page 172, 6.2, I would like to know what is SRO, and I'd like to know this project and its program for the 8th of July, and what would that look like in practice? Just give me 6.2, sorry, page 172.
Yeah, it's the senior responsible officer.
Yeah. Yeah, and in terms of the next step for some project, what would that look like in practice? I mean, could you run?
Well, they would bring updates to the leadership team and to the joint leadership team, i.e. the executive management as well, about the project they've been working on. And we would review the progress that's been made and we would hold them to account. And we would, I suppose, as members, to give strategic directions to that work.
Yeah, sorry, within, so that language really relates to the governance and grip section above, which is how we're trying to program manage the approach and to try and set out to you and give you some assurance that we've got structures and systems in place to try and make some of these changes happen. Senior responsible officers are allocated to each of the different work streams that Council of Cities introduced at the beginning. And within each of those, then we've got project leads for particular projects that require them, and some of the sizable change projects that we're trying to scope. And at the moment, or tomorrow, we're having a further conversation looking at in deep dive at all of the details that we've been able to bring. And once we understand a bit more about the direction that we feel that we can take, I think we'll be able to provide a much fuller update to OSC and others about the direction of travel and about how we might be able to reach the rest of the gap.
Thank you.
For September.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Pretty.
Thank you. Page 159, the last point, 3.3. It talks about that there are 36 commitments in the council plan. And I just thought it's rather a long list. And given the current times, is this really feasible and viable? And should we be revising that list of?
Which reflects the point that
there has already, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think the intention is to do that.
Yes,
That's the answer.
So certainly, and I think already we are focused on sort of priority actions from that plan, and you will at OSC be receiving an update on the council plan action plan in due course. I don't remember which meeting, and then so that I think it'd be a good opportunity to look at that and see whether it was spread too thin or whether we're actually doing okay. I mean, what I would say is some of those council plan actions do reflect some of the relatively core business of the council. So it's not like 76 brand new things that we put on top of what the council already did.
Thank you. And just an observation, I'm sure you've taken into account already. Page 165 in the table of the improved commercialization. We talk about one thing I thought of as well, that social housing properties quite often have garages, parking spaces, which are actually let out to residents who don't live there, and maybe I don't know if you consider revisiting the commercial charges for that.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, because right now it's quite heavily subsidised even for non-residents. And that'll be something else, you know.
So annually, we review fees and charges across the board, so we can pick that up, that's part of the budget setting process, and there's a paper on fees and charges, so we'll.
And make it more comparable to market rate instead of, you know, for non-residents.
Yeah, the non-resident charges are higher, so just to assure you, so the parking spaces and garage spaces are charged to residents who live on that estate at a certain rate. And yeah, a weekly charge will be higher, but there may still be some.
There's a market, there's an arbitrage there.
Thank you.
Some of this has been touched on, but I just wanted to try to make this a bit tighter. This is based on the theme. If you go across the whole council. Council divided up into departments or executive director areas. One of the challenges the budget working group made last year was that we would be able to be informed in the budget process starting in September as to how far transformation efficiencies had gone and how much of that had been embedded, for instance, in family children services. So in my role as chairing family children services, the question is, will we be able to receive a brief on how this work affects family children services by September? Because we need to, if we're going to hit an understanding of how the budget should evolve in family children services, be back into the corporate budget by November. I think that should be fine. It's really a matrix where
Yes.
it's where the theme meets the place, if you like.
So this is due to come to overview and scrutiny, I think, on the 30th of October, the full draft budget. Prior to that, the Family and Children Services Committee that's immediately before that would, I'd say, be the appropriate one to be diving into with the executive director.
So we can challenge Sarah Newman and her team.
Absolutely. And then, of course, just reminding everybody that there's £12.5 million worth of savings being delivered in the year that we are in now from the budget that we set in February 24. And so, progress against those savings, making sure that those savings are achievable, noting, as the committee noted, that we didn't achieve 100% of the savings last year. So I think sessions which both keep an eye on those savings, as well as looking at what the proposals are in the coming years. Probably worth saying to Children's Services as well that they are proposing some savings that are spread over 2 years at the moment, and mindful of the ILACs visit.
And also it might require some investment. So
and that's always a question with any of these programs, is what investment, what one-off investment might you require in order to deliver the transformation.
But in the context of this paper, it's reasonable for us to ask Sarah Newman, for example, for a reflection on how transformations are working in her.
I think September committees would be a time.
No comments on the paper per se, but a general sort of request about communication with residents and potential involvement about some of those type decisions that we have to make. I appreciate it's probably early in the day. But
Could I just say that any service change will require full resident consultation in it. So the budget is consulted on, but individual service changes also require.
I think it's actually important to be having these conversations earlier, so that actually it doesn't come to the budget meeting. I think it is that ongoing. We've got some decisions to make, and take the residents with us.
Thank you. I'm not going to ask any more questions. I'm looking forward to seeing more meat on the bone at the next iteration and really having a look at what you've done. And just another comment, which is that there's a very long introduction to this paper. And actually, at this committee, when we're talking about stages of transformation on a regular basis, we actually don't need an officer to spend. I'd like you to save time and effort. And actually, you don't need to write this much introduction for us. Although it's all very well written and much appreciated, but in the next iteration, do feel that you can be a bit briefer. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to paper 7A and 7B, and I'm going to remind us and myself. But part B, the strategic risk register, will be discussed in private session if you discuss it in that detailed fashion. I'm going to ask Dan when he sits down all day. There are just several bits that we can
Can we discuss it in general in the meeting, not in specifics, the list players?
Yeah, yes. Or I can flag it.
Because I know that there are some questions around it. But it's in party, it's a few aspects of it are commercially sensitive, it's not a fair.
What's on it?
Okay. So we're now looking at Notting Hill, Notting Dale, Pete's Network. I had stopped calling it Notting Hill, so it's not down to Pete's Network, but that's good, that makes it feel better. Who'd like to introduce this?
Yeah, well, I'll video a couple of sentences. So I think I would just say that I think this project is going to be a good thing, but it's a very complex thing to introduce. The good thing for residents is that we're maintaining the price promise. That's still a big part of our plans, and that it should also improve the environmental footprint of the estate. But the key, I suppose, change from the perspective of the people sat here and probably who are more deeply immersed in the heat network that's taken place over the last 6 months is around KAA. It's flagged here at 7.3. They had previously signed an MOU and they had looked again at what's possible, and they're now not intending to join the network at the time they had previously intended to. And I think what I would flag to the committee as a kind of strategic issue and potentially a risk if not handled well, is that they were going to be more than 10% of the heat load. That creates spare capacity that needs to be addressed. There are several ways in which that can be addressed, but how we do so is quite a difficult thing to work through. So there is work happening in terms of options. We've talked a little bit to residents about it already, and I think before decisions are taken, we'll need to do that more. Did so with ward members. I think we've said to you in the past that we intend to speak to ward members during the course of this process. But I think it's important to lay that on the table as something that kind of, if you're working on the heat network regularly, that's the number one thing that you're kind of thinking about at the moment. And in terms of the option that we look at, I suppose it ranges from the heat network starting on a smaller range of buildings than intended or a larger range than intended. And the financing obviously is also kind of affected by the route we take.
Thank you. I'm going to start with Portia.
I think this project is a very good project. My concern is how are you going to, link Lancaster West and Upper Clarendon and Lower Clarendon to the same network, considering that their system's already made up? How much is that going to cost? And would that be so difficult to link every single household from that side of Lancaster West?
Sounds like what's you?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So at the moment, excellent question. So at the moment, we have two end-of-life heat networks effectively in Lancaster West, which provide heating and hot water services to 80% of the homes there. Those that are excluded from those two networks are very close to Treadgold, which many of you know are right in the middle, if you will. In terms of answering a question from a technical perspective, it's essentially putting in very high performance pipe work that essentially highly insulates hot water to a point that it only loses a degree for every mile, if you believe. So that's how hyper efficient I think the route map is in your paper. The pipe work is going to be, and effectively it'll be a combination of going along roads, pavements, or under crops of blocks. So you mentioned Clarendon, Camelford, but covered walkways, for example. More than happy. I think we have done a bit of a walkabout before with Environment Scrutiny Committee. So if people are really interested in that something, that's something that we can absolutely look to arrange. In terms of the overall cost of the programme, we've got a final investment decision of 27 million. But that's not just for Lancaster West, that's for the primary plant that would allow the leisure centre, baseline business studios, another 10% of residential units, and as mentioned, also Kensington Aldridge Academy, who've now withdrawn. So we're currently assessing a range of options in terms of who we may connect to. And I think the good news is there's a number of them. So it won't be a case of us putting all our eggs in one basket.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. And is there any thought of development to the wider the immediate community, as in, Beaumont Street or Walmer Road or Clarendon Road or Portland Road? Would it?
So another good question. So I think I'll start with the piece around consent, resident consent and buy-in, and Councillor Simmons and our two ward councillors and I have regularly discussed this, and given the sensitivities we're all aware, I think that has to come up first and foremost. Now that said, there's been some excellent work that has gone on in Notting Dale as a whole. From a housing point of view, there's £65 million worth of capital investment going into Notting Dale outside of Lancaster West, so considerable improvements in terms of the fabric performance and the level of producing the level of heat demand. Also, we mentioned the council plan earlier. Some of the work that has gone on across Notting Dale and indeed beyond it, to look to make Notting Dale a resident-led eco-neighbourhood by 2030, I think has garnered the sorts of conversations from residents, which I'm used to having by now, but in a positive way. When they say, well, why is Lancaster West getting that and not us? We can say, actually, we are future-proofing the network. So the network is designed, if you assume KA was still joining, we've still got another 10% of connections, so another 120 homes that we can potentially join. And the good news is heat networks work best at scale. So our optimum level would be about 2,000 units, which Notting Dale has the largest amount of social housing in the borough. And so I think we're in a good place potentially if residents wish to work with them and expand at scale, notwithstanding the complexity of the first phase, primarily in Lancaster West.
Thank you. Plan.
Thank you. This is called the Notting Dale Heat Network. It's actually phase one of the Notting Dale Heat Network. As you just said, James, we're talking about Lancaster West plus 120. And as Councillor Gaxton has mentioned, I think it's reasonable to ask about the level of disruption to the public realm of the ward, requiring to connect these quite disparate parts to the one network. Yes, we do have £65 million of investment in the ward outside of Lancaster West. And what that translates to is quite a lot of building work. And what that means is that in the years immediately preceding the fire, we had a lot of building work. We had the fire in the ward, and now we have a lot of building work. And I want to just really make a plea for people to be mindful of the impact of that upon residents' quality of life. When you have a traumatised community, one of the things you don't particularly need is a lot of disruption and certainly not a lot of noise. And yet, unfortunately, that is what the council is delivering. And I just feel very hopeful that it will be worth it in the end. I just wanted to say something about the updates that you mentioned, James, to the ward councillors. So there was some discussion at the last programme board, and I had understood that there would be an update in the next couple of weeks concerning some of the options that were being looked at. I'm looking forward to seeing that at the next programme board.
You had it before, just needs to
So hopefully we'll have some good updates.
Yeah.
But I also just want to make a plea in terms of some of our more vulnerable residents. I won't mention the particular blocks, but I think you'll know the ones I mean, where we have residents in supported accommodation, for instance, and perhaps some with varying forms of cognitive decline or ageing. For whom adapting to the operation within their home of a heat network is not going to be, probably not realistic actually, but certainly not going to be easy. So I just want to make sure that we are being mindful of that when we are considering the options. And yeah, I think that's
I'm sure we
my
will be
contribution.
mindful and taking that on board.
Can I come back on those 3 points quickly? So in terms of the disruption, absolutely. I think that in my own view of what residents tell us, Lancaster West and other estates in Nottingdale indeed were effectively in a form of managed decline. And I think it's really important that we're clear the reason we're doing this investment is because residents have asked us to and support that, notwithstanding the level of disruption is absolutely seismic. And we have got an extensive respite programme involving co-working space, the ability to temporarily or permanently decant people, a local lettings ban, the wider Grenfell policy as well to move people out if you don't want to go through this level of disruption. The other thing to say, I think there is so much work going on after Lancaster West Silchester Estate is the next largest major work scheme, which is literally over the road. And of course, we've got the future of Grenfell Tower itself and any future memorial. We are working with a range of stakeholders in terms of managing the logistics. We're trying to do practical things like ensuring that other than state roads, there will be zero road closures at all. There will be contraflows and traffic lights. We're going to minimise the chance that there will be roads that are totally closed. Not least because of the amount of primary schools we've got in the area and what sort of behaviour that can drive. And just on the last point, a key part of the programme is what we call resident transition, which is about working with the full diversity of our residents, could be language needs, age, disability and so on, to make sure that they are in a much better situation. So they have control of their heating and hot water, whereas at the moment they don't, we control it. We have flats that register north of 50 degrees Celsius in some hallways, for example, the risk to older people with that. And equally in the winter, it can be phenomenally cold. So a combination of ensuring that we work with residents, we are picking things like smart thermostats, which are super intuitive to use. They literally just have a big number on the front. They're not something you need an IT degree to understand. So that's something we've been doing from the outset. Because you're quite right, we are moving Lancaster West, as I say, from the 19th century to the 21st century, and so that's quite an increase in how people learn to live in their homes.
Thank you. Can I just quickly come back on one point there to make sure that the committee are aware? In terms of respite, as far as I'm aware, this is only relating to the Lancaster West refurbishment and Treadwell Bradley.
So some of the
let's say we are digging up streets here, as per map on 177, just to give an indication. Me, for instance, I will not be having any respite.
So
and neither will perhaps a lot of people, say, on Walmer Road, for instance.
So if we are able to, obviously, what we can't do is offer non-council tenants use of flats,
of course,
and so on. But things like using a co-working space in baseline studios, free refreshments, that sort of noise cancelling headphones, we can do that. So we will be making clear, as we do with planning, we actually consulted well beyond what we were required to from a planning point of view, taking that point entirely. And so if someone comes in off the road, say, Treadwell Street, and we're disturbing them, we will work with them, as we do at the moment, to see what we can do within the fact that, they aren't council tenants, but
I'm sure
it won't be a case
the ward councillors will be on your case.
Thank you. Thank you. The point of consultation, sorry, Mary. Phase 2 of the Nottingdale Heat Network, which is in the Nilo plan, the consultation there was specifically around Lancaster West. So it's phase 2 of the Nottingdale Heat Network is to go ahead. It will need the same funding again, I understand from the last briefing. And number 2, there would need to be some form of consultation. So in terms of what we're committing to here, we have consulted perhaps a little bit beyond what we were required to, but certainly not for a Nottingdale Heat Network. And I just want to really make sure the whole committee is aware of those sorts of issues and sensitivities before we move on and go forward. Thanks.
How long is too long before I can use being used as an excuse for putting the wrong question in the wrong section? So,
Are you going to re-ask the question, which was about?
I'm going to re-ask the question. What's happening with the taking? Yes, and there is some concept. And how do we know what's going to happen with any profits that you do get? Where are they going to go? What sort of assurances do we have on that? And I realise that only Johnny was up, the three of you actually up there. Asked that.
I think we heard it though.
Yeah.
You're in the room, buddy.
So I suppose the first thing to say is the reason we set up the company initially was primarily because at that time, energy security, the net zero phase as they were then, required it because they were looking to prime the heat network market, and they wanted councils to be part of that in terms of creating wholly owned subsidiaries. That steer has changed, actually changed before the general election, and there's no reason why I think it would change again. So that is something that we are reviewing in terms of what's best, given where we are with KAA removing itself. Now, as you can imagine, going to residents of Lancaster West and saying we're intending to set up a company that the council owns, this council owns, to be absolutely candid, was not something which we took lightly, and something which took a lot of discussion, assurance. Councillors Taylor Smith, Ceases and Suffolk Bay have to come to meetings to hear the strength of feeling and the cynicism and the lack of trust that exists because of what has happened historically. So this wasn't something we were looking to do, and it certainly wasn't something we were looking to do in order to make profit, as it was put to us by a number of residents. In terms of ensuring that, there's a number of things we've done. So in terms of the memorandum and articles of understanding, they make clear that this is about providing a benefit primarily to social housing tenants in Nottingdale. It makes clear that any notional profit is reused to help address things like fuel poverty, replace failing heating and hot water systems, and also help to achieve the council's decarbonisation aims. We're the only heat network in the country that we're aware of that actually has social housing tenants on the board. So 33% of the board are indeed the very customers there to ensure that resident voice is there like a stick of rock. I think it remains a concern in terms of what the council could do with this company, and could we sell it and so on. And I think that comes back down to the business case. It only pays itself back over a 40-year period. It's not a particularly lucrative proposition for any large heating and hot water energy provider. And I think it's fair to say that the team have done such an extensive job on the level of engagement. We're now talking about the details of things like metering and billing, how frequently will I pay, direct debits, that sort of stuff, rather than that initial piece, which was a concern over we don't trust a council company. We're much further down the line, which is as a result of that.
That's great. That's just to note that that's all good. We would put all that, but in terms of when I'd like to know what we could expect, actual assurances about how what money is going where, if it is generated, and I'm not expecting a huge amount, but that.
And I think kind of once this is in operation and the kind of companies are going concern, then if it's totally appropriate, in fact, we're probably obliged to kind of produce at the very least an annual report which shows exactly what those flows of money look like. But the starting presumption is, and as Dave says, that there's a very long time before the company will be projected to turn anything that you call a profit. But if and when that does happen, the council as the sole shareholder in the company is then as it were the beneficiary of that, and that would be kind of reinvested in a kind of transparent way, subject to the democratic processes of the council.
Thank you. Certainly.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. So I think this is to be commended. It's a very, very good thing that we're doing a 100% renewable energy network. It's fantastic. So one quick question on page 201 in relation to the threats that are identified. And in the actions to mitigate threats.
Are we in the risk register, are we?
No, we're in the business plan. That's fine.
Perfect. Sorry, Stephen, go on.
No problem. Page 201. This is the cost of electricity rising above inflation. The final sentence in the actions to mitigate is that we're going to hedge those costs by bulk buying through the council. I just want to get a bit of a steer as to how you think you're planning to do that, what you think that risk will look like, what those traditional potential costs will be, that hedging process.
Yeah, so sort of says
you're looking to the future, so I understand it.
Yeah, it's trying to. So what we're expecting to see. So government forecasts and various independent sort of economist forecasting suggest that gas is expected to go up, electricity is expected to go down in the medium to long term. Obviously, we're moving from gas as a fuel to electricity as a fuel. 1 unit of gas gives you 0.85 of a unit of heating and hot water. Whereas 1 unit of electricity going to an SLC pump gives you 2.5 units of heating and hot water. So the fact that at the moment, I think as of today, electricity prices are about 4 times the price of gas is sort of ameliorated by the technology to some extent. We're also introducing things like solar PV, we're substantially reducing the heat demand by installing triple glazed windows, external wall insulation and so on. So we're reducing things that way. So from a customer point of view, the way that we're technically designing the programme contains some of those risks in terms of fluctuation. Because typically what we've seen is the nature of global energy market, gas goes up, electricity goes up because everyone panics from one to the other and so on. In terms of the bulk buying, so the council currently bulk buys all of its electricity and all of its gas for its communal plants. So we've got 24 heat networks currently within housing management at least. So we bulk buy gas currently, so we can get some price certainty. I'm not sure if this council buys annually or every 3 years. It sort of tends to vary, and it's something that all London councils are somewhat exposed to. So that's the sort of a mechanism, and it at least gives you some price certainty to sort of forecast moving forwards, and you're not subject to the sort of domestic tariff shock of electricity's gone up, the company's bust type of thing. So it doesn't necessarily deal with the fact that it's something that's going to send electricity prices higher in the medium term, but it gives you that surety if you know what you're dealing with, and you can make those decisions. And we're looking from a regulatory point of view, or we're actually now going to be required to be regulated by registered with the Heat Trust, which is like a consumer best practice body. What that allows us to do still is to change prices biannually. So if there was a black swan event and for whatever reason the council or the company needed to amend its prices, it would be able to do that within those periods.
Greg. Thanks very much. I'm a bit nervous about this, and I see the paragraph 4.5 as the sentence, nothing about these is a 100% council-owned local energy company. I'm thinking that Nottingham City Council is going bust as a result of investing in, admittedly, I think a much larger scale projects. But then I see, this is the second time I've seen this paper or an update, but this is the first time I've seen the risk register, and I'm not going to go into the individual items. But my nervousness has increased considerably, given that every single risk, I think, started off as top right-hand corner, which is almost inevitably going to happen, and catastrophic failure, which is what top right-hand corner means in the risk register. So if I was on board looking at the risk register, where I haven't counted how many risks there are, 12 risks, and the whole lot are almost inevitably going to happen, and they're all catastrophic. I would be thinking about scrapping the project. I can see that you've driven down, and it might be the way the risk register is presented rather than perhaps the scaling isn't fine enough to express the real position. But the way it is presented, and I appreciate you've driven down some of the likelihoods a little bit since over time, but that makes me very nervous. And also, we don't have rather obvious things like a major customer withdrawing is not a risk, and yet it's actually materialised, and you're having to scrabble around to look at that and to mitigate that. That makes me nervous. You've got long-term maintenance; these things are very expensive. I'm not sure that's maybe it's me missing it, but that doesn't seem to be included in the risk register. So I am pretty nervous about this investment and what it could turn into. And it looks to me like it could be a millstone around the council's neck, and that worries me on behalf of our residents. I think in terms of the further question to consider what further information would the committee require, I think we should be informed if there's any changes to cost of timescale of the significant nature of this project. But I'm happy for the officers and the members to reflect back on me whether I got it wrong.
I would say, first thing I'd say is that I'm nervous too. It's a kind of big project with risk in it, and it's innovative, which we're proud of, but also anything that's innovative has inherent risk. I would give you a degree of comfort on the specific comparisons to the Nottingham example, in that my understanding of Nottingham is that was, if you like, a council-owned kind of utility company that was competing in the utility market against other utility companies, and kind of failed in that. This isn't that. This is something much more akin to something that social landlords have been doing for decades, which is providing
decentralized heating systems for a whole block. So that's not a competitive environment, it's a monopoly environment. Now, of course, the monopoly environment carries all sorts of other risks, principally for the consumer in terms of the control that the monopoly supplier has. But what we're not doing is competing in the monarchy in the same way the Nottingham company is. But so I'm not worried about that particular risk. I am, however, worried about a number of risks, including some of the ones you referred to in the risk register. I think, in terms of the major withdrawals, we are in control of the housing. Obviously, we are in control of the leisure centre. The academy we weren't in control of, and I think. So you're right that this has materialised, and as Councillor Balasisi said in his introduction, that's taken a position where we were kind of, it was in a comfortably viable position to something which is much more kind of just breaking even, as it were. And as we've said, and as it says in the report, the aim has to be to add new connections to the network over time in order to replace that load. And that was true anyway for the recent change described, so that these networks just get more and more efficient and better value for money the more they're working at scale. But I don't want to sit here and kind of give you the impression that this is all just kind of ticking over nicely and we're not concerned about it, because actually there's a whole bunch of risks in here to do with the scale of it, the innovation of it. And while it is the case that social landlords, including us, have been managing heat networks for decades, this is a new technology and involves a wider range of kind of users that has been the case in the past, and that inevitably carries risk with it, which needs to be very carefully and actively managed. And I don't know, Councillor Balasisi, if you want to say anything about, as it were, your frame of mind on it, before perhaps James answers some specific question about the risk profile.
Do I want to say more? I think I share, a reasonable degree of concern about the project for some of the reasons that you talked about and some of the reasons that you talked about. I think the role that members can usefully play is to monitor the progress and scrutinise the work that's happening and act as a bridge between the community that it would hope to serve in terms of the network and the officers who are going to be doing the kind of more operational piece around integrating the network. I think, I'm fortunate because I've got two very experienced members on the board with me in Jem and Soft at the moment, and previously Kim. So people with a good level of experience in terms of the council portfolio experience too. And collectively we're seeking to carry out those functions and mitigate the risks.
I guess one of the things I've reasonably say. So one thing I might add before James comes in is that the other bit of context, of course, as James has said, is that doing nothing was not an option here, because the existing system at Lancaster West was end of life. We knew we had to do something new to replace it. It was never going to be the case, given the kind of regulatory framework for the direction of travel, but that would mean individual household heating systems. So we were going to have to do something at the kind of district scale. And given the commitments that we've made and the kind of the existing regulatory and expected future regulatory environments, it was going to have to be a low carbon option. And that already narrowed our focus into an area which was going to carry a lot of these risks, if you see what I mean. So it's not something I think we've done where we've stepped into risky territory where there was a hugely much safer alternative that we were stepping away from, if that makes sense. Not that should make us any more relaxed or complacent about the risks that we do face, but it's an important bit of context in thinking about kind of how we've got here. If that makes sense.
And just to add to that, so this risk register is actually from April 2023. It aligns with the business plan, so it's not the live current risk register, and I'm more than happy to provide that to the committee. That provides some assurance, both in terms of what we're currently assessing as risks, but probably more use what we're doing to manage and mitigate and eliminate them. I mean, in terms of the document alongside the business plan, yes, some of them have manifested themselves, certainly ones where we thought they might. but equally we've eliminated some of them. So 8.1 around the tenders coming back at a level beyond our capex budget. That didn't happen, so we've got through final investment decision. And also for the reasons that we're discussing this now, I think it was by no means a foregone conclusion that we were going to get agreement within the council, both amongst officers, but also in terms of the leadership, given the risks that we are clearly can all understand and see. So there was a big focus there on how we manage the stakeholder side of things, learn from Nottingham, but learn positively as well from Islington and Enfield, for example. So we have learned from things that have gone wrong, but also things that have gone well. And as a result of that, even though we're not at a stage where we're turning on the heating and hot water from a renewable source quite yet, but the way that we've done things, certainly in terms of resident engagement itself, has been recognised as best practice by central government, who have included a feature on Nottingdale Heat in its green heat network funding guidance, and also the National Unlock Net Zero Award as well, where we were shortlisted quite recently in terms of the level co-design there. So there are lots of things where we have learned from others who have got things wrong to make sure that we don't as far as possible.
Can I just turn in Toby's question again, because it's a small p political nervousness that this company, the council company, is loss making for several years, and even on the best case, it then becomes profitable in inverted commas as a means of paying back its losses. But that profit is based on our own residents, and I just wonder, even if presented in that way, how's that going to reflect back on the council? And I think you might be on that one already from what you said earlier, but how sustainable is that model? I mean, we lose money for 15 or 20 years, and then how confident are you that we will, as a council, recoup the money?
So I think that the thing that's important to sort of highlight is the business plan assumes zero expansion. And for reasons we've touched on and we've tried to include certainly in the business plan, there are loads of really good opportunities, especially for this council or us as a housing management landlord, but particularly in Nottingdale, there are lots of social housing units that we need to replace the heating and hot water, mainly because it's needing replacement before you even move into policy that's likely to drive removal of gas. If we were to buy a 15-year gas boiler now, to replace what we've got, we're likely to have to remove it at some point within its lifespan and replace it with something else. So in terms of that counterfactual, I think that is something where residents sort of understand where we're coming from, and also in terms of where the profit, if we wish to call it that, is going. We're really clear about this is paying back loans primarily, one to the council and potentially beyond that as well. In the same way that people with rent may pay back loans in terms of the capital works investment that they have done. To be fair, our residents are absolutely, willing to get involved in that level of detail, and we've shared that with them. The only way you're going to get something like this to the stage where we have where 86% of people in the last poll have supported this is to be totally open and transparent. And I've no doubt that if I know one thing about the residents of Lancaster West, they will be asking us every opportunity if it starts making money, we start expanding. They'll start saying, well, why are our bills still as high? And the plan is that as we expand, we can reduce those fixed standing charges, which will make it a far more affordable proposition. But we don't want to assume things have expanded before we've even got the first phase right.
Thank you. So if the chair agrees, perhaps if we could have an assurance that we'll get informed if there's a big change to the cost or the timelines.
Well, what I was going to suggest was that the next brought up the point that this is rather an ossified business plan, our old business plan that we've got in front of us, apart from anything else, it doesn't reflect KA's withdrawal. And similarly, the risk register is out of date. So next time, maybe we could have an updated, we don't need the whole business plan anymore, but the two essential bits of the risk register and the figures going forward. We'll have a more up-to-date version of those next time we discuss it. It'd be very helpful.
If we want to agree a kind of rhythm of us coming back at the right time.
Exactly. So I think we should do that outside of this meeting. And obviously then with the risk register, just take the commercial ones out so that we can discuss most of it in the round in part A. I don't think there's going to be any reason tonight to go into part B because we're able to discuss it. Both managed to discuss it without going into it, but and there shouldn't be in future. Yeah. Thank you, Greg. So turn to Joanna.
Can I ask, is this a cost that's recoverable from leaseholders? And if so, what's the expected average cost. I know when this did come to housing select committee, there was talk about a guarantee. Has there been a guarantee given by the council in respect of Eden? And what have we done to address the noise from heat pump? Because again, I remember discussing that with you. I very much, by the way, share Greg's concerns. I'm somewhat reassured, but I'm still very much on our radar.
Yeah, so three good questions. So the first one, in terms of the leaseholder split, if we were to divide crudely, if I might say, the 27 million just across the social housing units, just because I can't work out the maths otherwise, it's about £30,000 worth of investment per home. Now, a lot of that is well, not a lot of it, but some of that is will be reimbursed from the leisure centre and based on business studios and indeed any other connections. But broadly speaking, that's what we're looking at. Now, half of that is what we call the primary network and the plant. None of that is rechargeable because it's viewed as an improvement because we're not replacing gas like with like. We've also got the issue of the temporary boiler outside Teston Walk. The council has received its insurance payout for that. And so that we wouldn't be in a place anyway, even if it was rechargeable, to put that to leaseholders. So already half of what a leaseholder is getting, if you like, is not chargeable. Now, in terms of what is chargeable, it's what we call the secondary and the tertiary. That's basically the pipes in and around and through buildings, and then the tertiary is the radiators, your smart thermostats, your heat interchange unit, and so on. A lot of that is chargeable, but the council committed to a what we call a Grenfell discount for our resident leaseholders who are occupants at the time of the tragedy and are still living there at the time of works. That broadly knocks off about 54% of that £15,000. So essentially, leaseholders are getting a relatively a good deal and investment in quality of their homes first and foremost, but also the value down the line. As you would expect, this is the largest single leaseholder bill we would be charging through anything we're doing on Lancaster West. So it is something where it's quite palpable when we heard from leaseholders that it's their view of some of them is that they shouldn't be paying anything because of the impact of tragedy and so on. But we've also got to think of the precedent of the leaseholders on Silchester Estate who are facing bills of tens of thousands. So that's what we're trying to balance up. So in terms of the leaseholder breakdown, that's broadly what you're looking at. Your non-resident leaseholder will have to pay the full 15,000. So if you're renting it out to landlord. In terms of the price promise, so that is something that we can continue to offer. That is funded effectively by the housing revenue account. And what we've said there is we want to make sure that residents aren't in any way risking having to be paying more by moving from gas to electricity much sooner than they're required to do. So we will only charge the cheaper variable rate, either gas or, as the case has been in the last 2 years, what our new notional cost of heat network might be. Now, at the moment, the heat network price is about 10% more. So the HRA would have to effectively pay that difference to Nottingdale Heat. But what we've been able to do is to work with residents to explain why we can't afford to go further than that. We've got people saying there's going to be teething issues, we should have grace periods and so on. There are some things around the edges that we're looking to do because this is something that I think is the main concern of all residents, is how much I'm going to pay. And we learned from other failing providers, especially housing providers, like I say, who just let the technical experts get on with it, and then a big bill comes out, sausage machine, and then they just pass it straight on to the residents. We're also looking at the standing charge as well, and that's because leaseholders especially were looking to pay for the replacement expenditure required, whereas at the moment they would face, hypothetically, in 20 years' time, when some of the kit needs replacing, another 15 grand bill. One of the things we're looking to do is basically badge that up as part or incorporate that in the standing charge, so leaseholders never have to face another big bill again, which is a concern nationally of leaseholders. But that does require paying a bit more, paying upfront and gradually rather than in those sorts of iterations. So that's something we can look at. Like a sinking fund of sorts, exactly that. And the last question was on the noise of the heat pump. We're working very closely with colleagues in planning. We've just installed the air source heat pumps on the roof of Treadgold House, which is a residential block, and we have quite a lot of experience there with acoustic barriers, both from a sort of a hard standing perspective, but also looking to see if we can design in elements of sort of green wall as well, which provides an additional benefit from biodiversity net gain and so on. Where we're looking to put our air source heat pump array on the leisure centre, the nearest block is Bowmore Road apartments and Verity Close, and we've analysed that both from a sound point of view, but also from the cold air flow that comes out the air source heat pump and where it will come. Again, happy to share that with committee members of interest, and we found both of those should be absolutely fine in terms of compliance.
Thank you. Well, sorry, there was one question. Is there a guarantee or not?
On plant.
Has the council given a guarantee to anybody or
to the rest of, so the price promise,
the price promise.
That's yeah.
Statement, I'm personally a bit sceptical, no questions, because answered subject to us getting these update reports.
Thank you. Tracy?
A very quick one. Again, I'm a bit skeptical as well. How confident are you that you'll be able to deliver in time and you can keep your budget?
So I'll take the second one first. The budget's looking pretty good so far. So if I take the 2.7 million on electrical infrastructure, we're coming in at £1 million saving on that element alone. Now, we haven't started digging up the roads yet. There will be things that emerge. We have a degree of contingency, but of all the projects that I oversee in terms of Lancaster refurbishment, North Heat's in the best place from a budgetary point of view, given the hyperinflation that we've seen across the sector and other landlords scrapping capital programs because they just don't have the money. So that's in a good place. In terms of timing, we have seen some slippage. So I'll probably say about 3 months. And that's a number of reasons to do with the fact that the contracts are design and build. And so the contractors that are now in have come up with their own designs, and we're having some back and forth there with our contract administrators and our own architects sitting on our side. There's also been some issues to do with the KLC roof internally within the council, deciding the best strategy there from a financial point of view, but also making sure we don't delay this programme. But to give some assurance, because we have already installed 40% of tenants have got the new heating systems, people are already getting the benefit. So it's not a case of if we slip, as is probably likely, to be honest, from spring 25 to late summer 25, the heat on, people who've had the new radiators, thermostats, so will already have had some benefit. And of course, things like Treadgold House, people who are having the refurbishment. So it's not a case that switch on date will necessarily have a massive impact in terms of people feeling benefit. And just in terms of some of the contracts, like the O&M contracts, they only go live when the kit is live. So effectively, all we are doing is moving the 40-year business case down the line. So it's not a case of that in and of itself means that we will be accruing more cost.
One very quick one. You mentioned that when there is, the spare power later on, are you able to sell it back to the grid? I mean, would you consider that?
Another good question. So we've looked at, so we've got some solar PV panels on Treadgold House and 2 other blocks on Lancaster West. We looked at selling it to Nottingham Heat Network, but if there's any excess, because first and foremost, we want it to go to our residents in terms of their lighting, lifts and all that sort of thing. In a nutshell, it is so complicated to do that. We would probably, if we were to sell it all, sell it back to the grid, which is not a great rate, to be honest with you. You're probably making about 20% of what you have to buy it for. I think it's highly unlikely, given we're not going to be able to get solar PV panels on all of Lancaster West. It's highly unlikely we wouldn't be able to utilise that, but it is something we've looked into. We're also working closely with North Kensington Community Energy as well, who are quite active in the area. I think they're having discussions in terms of Silchester, some of the low-rise maisonettes there. Again, because I think in terms of the cost of living crisis, energy crisis and so on, solar PVs is something that we, as a council, can do quite a quick payback in terms of sort of 5 to 7 years rather than 40. So that's something we're looking at more broadly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I push back? I was concerned, and maybe it's out of date, by Appendix 1 when I looked at it again, now that we're all it's slightly jittery, and about the lack of experience on the board. I don't think that the board experience looks as deep as it should be. So, for example, there's only one with sort of top-notch accounting and finance. There's nobody there with project management experience. There's nobody there with engineering background or experience. I mean, they're not listed. And I think I don't know what somebody else is. I just think that board looks a bit light particularly given the concerns and the the sort of marginal nature of the business case. Is there anything we can do to, have you thought about that? And is there anything that can be done to address it?
Yeah, so I've been asked what page you're looking at, Chair, sorry.
I am looking at appendix one.
Oh, I see, yes. Yeah, I mean,
That's
The B's and C's.
Yes,
Yeah,
that is what
skills matrix is a bit frightening if you ask me.
Okay, yeah, I mean, what we've tried to do is balance the perspectives that people are bringing, learning from. You know, there are heat networks that fail because they've only had engineers. There's heat networks that failed.
Well, we haven't got an engineer.
That have only got one. Well, no, we've employed engineers to do the actual delivery.
Yes.
So some of those individuals are people who commission engineers to do some of the work. But I can share if it's helpful the CVs, and maybe it's a discussion we could have with the board.
Well, I'm just looking at this matrix,
Yeah.
and I would just say, and I don't want other people to say that it's a bit light
I
on
think
some
we
of the
accept challenge.
skills.
Yes,
That we really need. And it's all very well employing engineers, but you actually need somebody who knows how to interrogate an engineer, somebody who knows how to ask the right questions. And I'm not certain that anyone on this board is necessarily, they might be very clever and they might be intuitive, but I wouldn't say, it's a bit finance light and it's a bit light in other ways.
So we did build into the Articles of Association the ability to appoint 3 additional board members to reflect us any sense of that. So I think that's a helpful challenge we can take back.
I would think it'd be worth looking at. And the only other thing I was going to ask is the price promise a risk? Because it's not on the risk register as far as I can see.
There's a risk for the HRA more than this is a risk register for the company. And again, I think the broader risk registers, both strategic and operational, will go into a bit more detail, be clear who the risk is for. Now, at the moment,
Okay, so that's because the HRA is
it is funding.
Okay,
it's not the company.
That's fair enough. I did wonder why it wasn't on this risk register, but that makes it clear. But it clearly needs to be on an HRA risk register. I'm sure it is. Good. Okay, I have no other questions, and I'm sorry we've kept you so late. But it's been a really interesting session, and I think we all think it's a very, very important project to the council's environmental health and financial health. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we are going to turn to forward plan of key decisions, which I hope we can go through very quickly today, because we then need to turn to our work programme. Right, I'm going to call through the key decisions. Please, everybody else, follow me closely and shout out when you get to the page where you want to say to me. 1, 2,
Yes. Two. The bottom of page 2 is an item which should have happened by today. The 15th July shareholders committee. And then we're going to make some decisions and feedback on whether they did meet that made decisions.
That's so right.
So we're on page 2 then. Shareholder committee and people. Yes, Matt's on the 15th of July. Discussing decisions. So perhaps that would be in the update that we're going to have.
So the key decision was the ones on the 9th of February. There'll no doubt be another key decision on the ones on the 15th of February.
Right.
3.
Sorry, Mary.
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't quick enough to get into this one.
No, that's thank
Housing strategy.
Yep.
We have that on our work programme for housing communities.
Okay. 2, 3, 4. Yep.
The SC and mental health day service director award.
This yeah.
I'm quite concerned about, mental health provisions in the loop of the borough.
Are you concerned about this key decision?
No, I would like you to press ahead.
Oh, I see. You're wondering why it's so slow.
Yeah.
But it says 27th of March. Well, Jackie might find out because you can't find out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. I'm sorry, I'm flawless now. Right, we're now going to move on to the meeting issue of our work programme. Okay. So I think we thought there was 3 potential overlaps.
Yeah,
Yeah, did you want to talk us through this?
okay, there was 2 parts to this. One to agree any additional items that you want to add to your work programme. So paragraph 3.11 has the scheduled meetings and what's agreed already. So there was the workshop on Monday to discuss other topics that could be included. So they were key performance indicators, procurement, a review of top 5 contracts, possibly with a focus on project management, insurance, customer access, including the website, and possibly grandfather review of expenditure.
Yes.
Yes. So
Yeah, so that's for the OSC, so we need to agree those.
yeah.
And then the overall work programme.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Have we, Maxine said she was going to produce another update on the transformation work in time for feeding into something. Is that going to happen by then?
By
when, sorry.
Well, by September, 18th September.
Well, what I'll do is I'll talk to officers after this meeting if you stay.
It's the question I asked in the.
So, sorry, can I just come in on that to clarify? So, my understanding is that so we've had an update on the transformation savings programme tonight.
Yes.
Is that the committee meeting here on October the 13th is the normal one in the NTFS cycle for the budget paper, which will include all the savings and transformation to come here before it goes to leadership team. I don't propose to bring another report back here in September.
The question I asked, if you recall, was as to whether the information would be available to ask Sarah Newman in my case.
Yes. And I was thinking that you were referring to the individual scrutiny committees.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I think Maxine's saying yes, isn't she? That it will be available.
If it's not going to be available to OSC until later, how can it be available to the individual ones?
So what I was reading is that individual executive directors will be able to talk to their scrutiny committees, and I would suggest liaise with the chairs to the information that they'll be able to provide to scrutiny committees in September.
Yeah.
We will in September still be having negotiation discussions with lead members about the overall package of savings. So the distinction I was making was between departmental lead member and scrutiny chairs discussing on likely savings proposals that will come through the budget, and the full presentation of all of the
overall thing.
The overall thing, which should I would suggest come here on the 13th of October in order to have the best presentation. And then there is it doesn't go to it goes to leadership team on the 15th of November.
But in order for that to be prepared by the October meeting, the pre-work by the executive directors has got to feed into that. They've got to have full knowledge of what they're doing in their own bailiwick. Feed into that, so they will be able to brief on that.
They will be able to brief. What we won't be able to do is to give line by line detail on each budget saving, because that won't have been
improved. In the overall context. Yeah.
Okay. So going back to the OSC work programme, we've got the first 4. I did speak to the chair of audit and transparency, and I gather they've had 4 reports there. So I'm not sure that we need to add it.
When we had the work programming workshop, the reason I've mentioned this is precisely because we have had 4 reports of the transparency which did not deliver assurance that residents and some members had been seeking. And at that meeting, it was therefore suggested that it should be more properly come to scrutiny. And that's the reason why I have put it forward.
Yes, I think if they had 4 reports, we'd just be replicating.
No, that's my point. It's not replicating, it's something different. This is something that.
How is it different?
Because the kind of information that we need about the expenditure is not something which audit and transparency can deliver. So we're talking about the decision making around it, talking about where did the money get spent, on what basis, and with what outcome. And those are not things that an audit will do. And none of those 4 reports have done it. And
Okay,
when
well,
it was queried why we didn't have that information, they said that's not audit's job, it's scrutiny's job. So
I'm going to go where I haven't actually read the 4 audit reports.
I'll get the report.
So if you could possibly circulate, well, let me have them, and Claire, presumably you've read them all. And I'm very happy for you to have copies too.
Claire's on the committee, aren't you?
Because at the moment, I can't articulate this so that it's not a replica of the audit committee report.
I just have.
That didn't sound like it. You didn't make a category difference for me in what you were saying. I didn't understand it.
So the audit and transparency reports have been sampling some spending, checking whether the procedures were in order, checking whether receipts and that sort of documentation around each transaction was in order. And it found, I think, something about roughly 96%, which, given it was an emergency situation on the large transactions, people felt was.
Can I have a look at
But my point is that sort of detail is not the detail of where did this money, where was the spending done, on what basis, who was making the decisions. We're told repeatedly it's a resident-led recovery, and it never was. And those are the questions which residents, I'm sure you will remember, have come during COVID to speak to meetings about their concerns about where the spending has been done. And it turns out that is not a possibility to come from audit and transparency.
Well, I'm
happy to make the case for you.
Reports, and I think come back to you on that one, because at the moment we need to articulate the report that here better. We need to have a better brief of what that report's going to be, and I think I need to look at those 4 audit reports, and then we can discuss it, put it on the agenda for our next OSC or our next.
Well, there was some work done on this by Scrutiny, and then there was a joint meeting of audit and transparency.
Was that?
Yeah, this was some time ago. And then there were the 4 reports that Claire refers
So
to.
the final report, the meeting of the final report might be instructive in terms of understanding why this is coming, why I'm putting this to scrutiny and what those gaps actually are.
Okay. So I'll go and do that.
I think the joint meeting was in the last council term, so
I think it was, because I remember
before close. And then of course things have changed since then, so maybe it'll be something to do again.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go and review that.
Am I putting that on? Sorry, am I putting that on the programme, or is that?
Let's go away and put it on the programme. We'll do some research and come back on that one.
Right. Okay.
But I think if everyone's happy with the other 4, we'll add those on.
So I'll add those into the annual report, the other 4, and then you can
come back at the next meeting and we'll discuss that. And then we need to go back and look at the overall work programme and how it all fits together. And I wanted to, including the sort of role of the budget working group, which I hope we're all happy with as described in paragraph 4, but I wanted to add in paragraph 4.4 that the first working group will try to agree the documentation that they're going to request from the exec directors, exactly what data they want, so that I know we're going to have specialist papers, but those specialist papers reflect what everybody wants. And then I think our next task is to look at the individual select committees and where there's overlap and possible duplication. And I think Jackie had identified.
Yeah.
We'll just talk about ones you've identified.
Maxilla was raised as an overlap between adult social care, possibly this committee, and possibly housing. But since then, the lead member for adult social care and health, Councillor Brown, said adult social care will be leading on that. So there will be maybe other contributions. So that one's been resolved.
Can I ask,
Right, so
aspect
how
of
can we-
Maxilla, sorry, can I ask what aspect of Maxilla we're talking about? Are we talking about Maxilla City?
We're talking
Adult-
about the Maxilla Centre, and it was raised originally by the Adult Social Care and Health Select Committee. So Portia will know this.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's been raised with me separately, so I will certainly be very interested in any updates on that.
Yeah,
So we've been waiting for an update for quite some time now.
yeah, that's
And
why.
from my
raised
side,
it,
it's,
isn't it?
from my side, it's a communities aspect.
As I say, there was a bit of everything in it.
There's a bit of overlap, but are we happy that it sits in adult social care rather than in Claire's committee you can have input into it? Then there were two other potential overlaps, aren't there?
Yeah, the other one was housing and adult social care again, and it was to do with housing for older people. So adult social care had review provision of sheltered housing accommodation, extra care and supported housing for older people, plus projected demand. And then Claire, for housing, you had on page 12, yes, thank you. You had the older voice reviewing provision for older people, included supported accommodation, demand, older person's housing strategy and statistics. There was quite a lot in common, so there will be some areas of
Yes, it does.
Do you want to push that on to adult social care? Are you happy to do that? And then, I mean, there might be scope for a joint session at some point or something on that one.
I mean, if the item in adult social care can include the housing aspect.
Yes.
Well,
we'll make sure that
that's
Lucy
fine.
does that.
Okay.
And the final one was
It was around
net zero.
environments, looking at net zero, and there was a bit of that going on in families with schools issues.
Yeah, and we thought that it wasn't an overlap because
Right.
the environment is an overall report on how the council's doing, as which schools is just one subset, and we wouldn't have time to go into the detail on schools. Well, clearly wants to go into
The area of the schools is different. It's impact of works on schools teaching and when the work's going to be done, and the impact of cost of electricity, especially if they don't do the fabric work first. They're doing fabric first, colder than not. There's issues around that, and who guarantees the extra cost and
And
so
that's a
on.
level of detail environment.
Yeah.
So
But it affects schools dramatically, but it doesn't affect the overall program. So I don't think there is any clash.
Okay, if you're happy with that, that's fine. And then the only other issue was housing, because you had your meeting last night where you did your work group and came up with a slightly enthusiasm members led to a slightly long list. And I think you thought that maybe a couple of them could start off their life as reports rather than as items.
Yeah.
Do you want to identify those?
So if we look on page 13. 12 and 13. So page 12 is the list of reports, which we have 7 there, although I think this will now be actually 6 if the older voice is moved to adult social care and health. And we have 2 deep dives, one on consultation and engagement, to include a question about co-design and temporary accommodation, and then a residents conference or evidence session on the Lancaster Ross refurbishment. And then we've got 4 items as a watching brief. Canal Side House, information, advice and guidance, damp and mould, horizon scanning. And I think we also have
from last night,
the Earl's Court, the World's End project.
And Hazelwood and
Hazelwood and Adair Towers.
So I thought maybe there's
under watching brief.
Under watching brief, we're going to put those. And does that mean that you might have a report on those for circulation, did you think? Or?
It does. I'm very keen to have data-driven scrutiny. So where we have, for instance, we have a briefing coming up on Nelside House. And depending on what the briefing says, it may become a paper or it may just continue as a watching brief.
Okay, lovely. So we're not going to, we've taken one off and we're not adding any to the reports. And then the deep dives are as they are, and the watching briefs have had 2 additions.
Yes.
So everyone happy with that?
Did you want to add your into D? Did you want to do your lessons learned from the IAG? Under D2?
Sorry, lessons learned from
The IAG contract that was there, information, advice and guidance. It was just when there was an extra paragraph, an extra.
Was that the World's End one that we were talking about?
Yes.
I think we've added that.
It's that, I think, not 2, I thought that was repairs.
World's End will be
The project.
World's End was cross-cutting.
It included, they talked about information.
They did very much, but I think the item itself is World's End project.
Which essentially repairs, is that right?
No.
Okay.
It's complicated,
Still
and that's why it's going to start with the briefing. Which will hopefully shed some light, guys.
Good, I think that's it. If there's no other urgent business, I'd like to bring the meeting to a close, and thank you all very much for the attendance. Luckily, I've been very soon.